Chapter 2188. On the void platform, Marshal St. Chanua floated quietly in the void. Blood kept flowing out of her nose and mouth as she let out a muffled groan. Her clothes and hair accessories were still intact. She still looked dignified and did not look disheveled at all. Judging from her appearance, she seemed to be unscathed. However, in reality, the poisonous black needle had already pierced into her divine soul. The pink divine soul in her mind had already been corroded by the poison and turned black. Her consciousness had also fallen into a coma. The extremely complicated poison was crazily corroding her divine soul and robbing her of her soul power. Her life was hanging by a thread. Ji Tianqing flew closer and glanced at her with an indifferent expression. He muttered to himself, "Such a vicious hidden weapon. You really brought this upon yourself. You can't live with it." He did not have the slightest bit of pity for such a vicious woman. Fortunately, he was prepared and was strong enough to destroy Marshal St. Chanua's scheme. Otherwise, he would have suffered the same fate as Marshal St. Chanua if he was hit by the poisonous black needle. At this moment, Yuan Chong, who was on the white light disc, shouted anxiously, "Marshal St. Chanua admits defeat. Ji Tianqing, why aren't you leaving?" He knew very well that Marshal St. Chanua's life was hanging by a thread. As long as Ji Tianqing moved his finger, Marshal St. Chanua would be completely killed. On the void platform, Ji Tianqing heard Yuan Chong's voice and turned his head to glance at him. Actually, he did not need to guess to know that Marshal St. Chanua's despicable method was most likely related to Yuan Chong. Now that he saw Yuan Chong so anxious and angry, he was even more certain of his guess. Soon, Yuan Chong personally entered the void platform and carried the unconscious Marshal St. Chanua to check on her injuries. Seeing that her divine soul had already festered and was badly damaged and corroded by the poison, Yuan Chong's heart was bleeding. He turned his head to look at Ji Tianqing and shouted with a ferocious expression, "Ji Tianqing, you damned bastard, you're so vicious. Chanua only offended you verbally, and you actually want to kill her." Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly and said indifferently, "I'm just giving her a taste of her own medicine. She was the one who was vicious. Of course, she was just a stupid chess piece. The one who really deserves to die is the mastermind." After saying that, Ji Tianqing took a deep look at Yuan Chong before turning around and leaving. Yuan Chong's heart was shaken by the deep look in his eyes. Fear rose from the bottom of his heart. However, he quickly suppressed the distracting thoughts in his mind. He quickly carried Marshal St. Chanyu and returned to the white light disc at lightning speed. "Quick! Come and help save Chinyu." He flew back to the crowd and placed Marshal St. Chanyu on the ground. He then hurriedly performed his art to treat her. Marshal St. Qingshan and the other young Marshal Saints quickly gathered around and looked at Marshal St. Chanyu anxiously. After a short while, the crowd checked Marshal St. Chanua's injuries clearly. They frowned fiercely and revealed worried expressions. "Your Highness, Ji Tianqing's black needle is extremely poisonous. We must remove the black needle and remove the poison from her divine soul. Marshal St. Chanyu's divine soul has been corroded to such an extent. Even if we can save her, her cultivation will fall greatly and her consciousness will be damaged. Ji Tianqing, that bastard, is too despicable and vicious." The young Marshal Saints discussed with each other through sound transmission. They were filled with righteous indignation. Yuan Chong glanced coldly at the crowd and said with a dark face, "I asked you to help me remove the poisonous black needle, not for you to talk. I know the power of the poisonous black needle better than you." Hearing his words, the Marshal Saints suddenly understood the origin of the poisonous black needles. One of the young Marshal Saints said without hesitation, "Since the poisonous black needle belongs to your Highness, quickly take out the antidote and save Marshal St. Chanyu." Yuan Chong was immediately furious. He raised his hand and slapped the young Marshal Saint's face. He scolded angrily, "Idiot! The poisonous black needle is specially used to deal with Ji Tianqing. Where is the antidote?" The young Marshal Saint was humiliated to the extreme after being slapped in front of everyone. However, he did not dare to resist, nor did he dare to get angry at Yuan Chong. He could only cover his face and leave submissively. In the end, Marshal St. Qingshan and Yuan Chong worked together to remove the poisonous needle from Chanyu's body. Yuan Chong kept the poisonous needle. Everyone worked together to cast a spell to remove the poison from Chan Yu's divine soul. Unfortunately, Chan Yu was poisoned too deeply. Even if the martial saints worked together, they could not completely remove it. Moreover, the martial arts competition had to continue. Martial Saint Qing Shan and Yuan Chong had to fight on the stage. Naturally, the treatment would be delayed. By the time the martial saints had finished their battles, more than an hour had passed. At this time, Martial Saint Chan Yu's injuries finally stabilized. However, she was still unconscious. Her divine soul had been corroded to the point of being full of holes and was on the verge of collapse. In her dark divine soul, there was still a powerful poison that was deeply rooted. She had to find a place that could detoxify the poison and spend hundreds of years to slowly remove the remaining poison. However, the damage to her divine soul was irreparable. It was basically impossible to recover. Even if the poison in her divine soul was completely removed after 100 years, her strength would not be restored. Simply put, Martial Saint Chan Yu was already crippled. Such an outcome made Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan and the rest very depressed. At the same time, their hearts were burning with rage. They hated Ji Tianqing to the bone. Not far away, Ji Tianqing, Lu Baishuang and the rest looked at all of this with indifferent expressions. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian did not have a trace of sympathy in their hearts. They only felt pleasure and relief. Martial Saint Chan Yu's heart is vicious. She actually wanted to use the poisonous needle to kill young Master Ji. Now that she has ended up like this, she only has herself to blame. Serves her right. Fortunately, young Master Ji is strong and has taken precautions. Otherwise, the one who is seriously injured and unconscious would be him. We did not guess wrongly. Yuan Chong, Martial Saint Qing Shan and the rest will definitely think of a way to deal with young Master Ji. Bai Long circled around Ji Tianqing's shoulder. His eyes were filled with a cold smile as he said in a mocking tone, "If you don't seek death, you won't die." It's a pity that little girl doesn't understand. This dragon lord has already learned such petty tricks when he was playing with mud in the past. Ji Tianqing patted Bai Long's head, indicating for him to speak less. Not long after, the second round of the competition ended. The 14 martial sacred realm experts finally came to an end after an intense battle. 7 martial saints including Mu Changtian, Zhou Jiu and Martial Saint Chan Yu had been defeated and eliminated. The 7 people who had successfully advanced to the third round of the competition were Ji Tianqing, Tai Hao Yunqi, Martial Saint Qing Shan, Martial Saint Tian Xian, Chaoing, Yuan Chong and a tall martial saint. A tall martial saint was of a foreign race. He wore a fiery red robe and a dark gold crown on his head. He had a head full of fiery red hair and a pair of golden eyes. He had a fluffy beard on his lower jaw and looked somewhat exotic. He was the current king of the Flame Spirit tribe and was also a rank 7 martial saint. Chapter 2189. However, the atmosphere on the white disc was getting more and more tense. Most of the 20 young martial saints were heavily injured. Their auras were weak, and their expressions and eyes were dim. However, the most miserable one was Martial Saint Chanyue. Yuan Chong wanted to send her away from the void platform and return to Sky Gazing City to heal. However, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly was not over yet, and no one could leave. No matter how arrogant he was, he did not dare to go against the rules to avoid embarrassing his big brother Yuan Zhan. Soon the third round of the competition began. Yuan Zhan announced expressionlessly, "In the third round of the competition, Yuan Chong, who is ranked first, does not need to draw lots. He will advance to the next round. As for the other 6 martial saints, they will draw lots to decide their opponents." After that, he threw the 6 jade slips into the air and messed up the order. One Ren Jiuxing, who was always quiet, stood up. "For this round of drawing lots, I'll be the one to do it." He waved his hand and shot out 3 green lights. The 6 jade slips were divided into 3 and brought back to him. Then, he read out the results with a solemn expression. The results are as follows. A tall martial saint against Chaoing, Tai Hao Yunqi against Qingshan martial saint, Tianqing against Tianxin martial saint. As he finished, Atal and Chaoing looked at each other and stepped into the light door calmly. Ji Tianqing looked calm. Tianjin Marshal Saint looked at him with a dark gaze. No one knew what he was thinking. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were excited. They transmitted their voices to Ji Tianqing. Young Master Ji, the chance for revenge is finally here. Ha ha ha, Tianjin Marshal Saint, that bastard, he finally met you. He is unlucky this time. Even Lu Baishuang gave up her modesty and looked at Ji Tianqing with a gentle gaze, a hint of hope in her eyes, although she did not say it out loud. However, Ji Tianqing could understand what she meant just by looking at her eyes. Obviously, she wanted Ji Tianqing to avenge her. As for Marshal Saint Qingshan, his expression was rather gloomy. He secretly glanced at Tai Hao Yunqi and couldn't help but mutter, "Damn it, I actually met him. I'm afraid I won't even be able to secure 4th place this time. Even if he can defeat the other two, he can only rank 5th at most." Soon the battle between Atal and Chaoying began. The two of them gave it their all and executed all kinds of secret techniques. They fought in the void, causing the sky to be filled with light and shadows. Atal was the king of the Flame Spirit clan and was naturally adept at controlling fire. Although he was only a martial sage, he was able to control the heavenly flames. Every move he made caused a sea of fire to fill the sky and fill up the empty space. His attacks were incomparably ferocious and overbearing. His mana was dense and long, as if it was inexhaustible. On the other hand, Chaoying was a descendant of the orthodox lineage. Her martial arts foundation was solid, and her mana surged like a river. Moreover, the sword techniques and ultimate techniques that she executed were orthodox techniques of the 5 elements. Every single move was filled with a vast and mighty aura. However, she was too young after all, and her strength was 2 levels lower than Atal's. The two of them had only exchanged a few hundred moves, and she was already showing signs of defeat. She was obviously at a disadvantage and was in a very passive position. Many martial sages on the white light disk were watching the battle between the two of them attentively. Sea Island Master, Cloud Sky Palace Master, Granny Yulong, and the others commented from time to time. They were all worried for Chaoying. Lady Chaoying is so young, but she already has such a high cultivation level and attainments in the sword principle. She is really commendable. Every move she makes has the demeanor of a prestigious lineage. It is really admirable. It can be seen that the Exploration Mountain martial sage has put in a lot of effort. It is a pity that her strength is not as high as Atal's. After all, she has less than 300 years of cultivation. As the people discussed, they looked regretful and comforted the Exploration Mountain martial sage. However, the Exploration Mountain martial sage shook his head and said with a smile, "You don't have to comfort me. Chaoying will definitely lose this battle. She is no match for Atal. Actually, with Chaoying's age and strength, I am already very happy that she is able to enter this round of battle. Of course, this is the result of drawing lots. Of course, there is a bit of luck involved." Seeing the Exploration Mountain martial sage being so wise and open-minded, the people did not say anything more. They all started to compliment him. After 15 minutes, the battle between Atal and Chaoying ended. The result was without suspense. Atal was naturally the winner. Although Chaoying lost, it was still a glorious defeat. Chaoying admitted defeat and left the arena while panting. Atal cupped his hands and bowed to her before leaving as well. The first battle ended. Immediately after, the second battle began. The Green Mountain martial sage and Tai Hao Yunqi entered the arena one after another. After standing still in the void, they cupped their hands and bowed to each other. "Seventh God's child, I didn't expect to meet you. I am really unlucky." The Green Mountain martial sage revealed a bitter smile and said to Tai Hao Yunqi. Tai Hao Yunqi smiled and nodded. He comforted him, "There is no choice. This result was drawn by drawing lots. It is not something you and I can control." The Green Mountain martial sage nodded slightly. He turned his head and glanced at Ji Tianqing on the white light disk. He said in a deep voice, "Actually, I want to fight with that kid the most. I hope he will lose to the Heavenly Heart martial sage. This way I will have a chance to fight with him for the 5th place." Tai Hao Yunqi raised his eyebrows and said with a playful smile, "This idea of yours is destined to fail. It is better to give up on it." What do you mean?" The Green Mountain martial sage frowned and looked at him with displeasure. Tai Hao Yunqi smiled and said, "No need to ask. You will know later." Then the two did not waste any more words. They both took out their magic treasures and weapons and started to fight. The two were the best among the young martial sages. One was ranked second and the other was ranked fourth. Not only were their cultivation realm high, but their cultivation was also very profound. The secret techniques they had mastered were also strange and unpredictable. In the process of fighting, all kinds of lost and rare secret techniques emerged one after another. It was dazzling. Without a doubt, the battle between Tai Hao Yunqi and the Green Mountain Martial Sage was the most entertaining battle in this sacred assembly. The two were locked in a fierce battle. Strange techniques were used, causing the void within 500 miles to turn into a 7-colored ocean, creating all kinds of scenes. Not only were the martial sages on the disc entranced, but even the hundreds of thousands of martial sages on the Sky City Square were fascinated. They were excited and agitated. This intense battle lasted for a full half an hour before it ended. The Green Mountain Martial Sage was still slightly inferior. He was severely injured by Tai Hao Yunqi. His body was covered in blood and his hair was disheveled. However, the Green Mountain Martial Sage had an ulterior motive. He refused to admit defeat and continued to fight. He did this to help Yuan Chong. He purposely exhausted Tai Hao Yunqi's magic power and forced him to use several trump cards. In this way, Yuan Chong watched the battle and understood more about Tai Hao Yunqi. That was why he was confident. Chapter 2190. The battle between Tai Hao Yunqi and the Green Mountain Martial Saint had ended. Just as the Green Mountain Martial Saint had expected, he had lost to Tai Hao Yunqi's sword and could not maintain his fourth position. Even if he could defeat the other three who had lost, he would at most be ranked fifth. Soon it was Ji Tianqing and the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's turn. Before the two of them had even entered the stage, there was a deep enmity between them. Ji Tianqing glanced at him coldly. He had already made up his mind to not let this hypocritical and despicable guy off. The Heavenly Heart Martial Saint naturally thought of this and guessed that Ji Tianqing would take revenge for Liu Baishuang. However, he was proud and did not think that he would definitely lose to Ji Tianqing. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a sharp gaze, and his lips curled into a cold smile. Then he stepped into the golden light door and entered the void platform. Ji Tianqing followed closely behind. They stood still in the void, facing each other with a distance of 10 miles between them. The two of them stared at each other, their eyes filled with coldness. Ji Tianqing did not want to waste his breath and immediately activated his powers. He formed a sword art with both hands and displayed his sword art. Sword Rain. His hands formed a mysterious seal, and his body lit up with a golden light that soared into the sky, bursting forth with an incomparably powerful aura. Suddenly, thousands of rays of starlight appeared out of nowhere in the dark and cold void. Every ray of starlight condensed into a starlight sword that was 10 feet long and shot down from the sky. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more than 6,000 starlight sword lights covered the void and locked onto the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's spiritual soul aura. As long as he was in the void platform, he would not be able to escape from the sword rain. Before the rain of swords fell, the void within a radius of several hundred miles was illuminated in a dazzling silver light. The terrifying power suppressed the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint, causing his body to bend and his face to turn pale. In the depths of his spiritual soul, a cold aura of death appeared. He could clearly feel the aura of death. This is impossible. I have already reached the 7th level Martial Saint realm, and he has just broken through to the Martial Saint realm. How can he have such terrifying power? At this moment, this was the only thought in the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's mind. 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper. At the critical moment, he shouted with a solemn expression and summoned a powerful defensive magic treasure. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, a huge golden dipper the size of a house appeared above the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint's head. The dipper's dipper looked like an ordinary person's dipper. The dipper's dipper had a large opening at the top while its bottom was smaller. The material of the golden dipper was very special. Its surface was engraved with mysterious runes, and it flickered with a dark golden light. Golden Dipper Saint Realm spent 80 years of his blood alchemy soul Dipper. Not only did it consume 36 types of ores and adamantium, it had also been tempered 1,000,000 times in the geocentric furnace, making its defense extremely powerful. Protect, 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 protect him, protect Mountain Marshal Saint Soul Mine, Saint Soul, Saint Soul, 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 Soul's Chi Sword. Bees. Bang, 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 bang. The starry sword light fiercely stabbed into the 100 refinements golden chalice, and actually emitted a series of metallic clanging sounds, crisp and clear. After that, many of the starry sword lights changed their direction and pierced towards the heavenly heart martial saint. However, they were all blocked by the golden light shield, causing a loud and dull sound. For a full 10 breaths of time the void was in chaos. Under the dazzling starlight, there was an inconspicuous golden light. Even though Heaven Heart Martial Saint had the protection of the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, he was still like a small boat in the middle of a stormy sea, undulating up and down, appearing and disappearing. Thousands of starry giant swords moved according to Ji Tianqing's thoughts. They danced in the void and tried to assassinate the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. The golden light shield could no longer protect him, and was soon shattered by the starry sword. He had no choice but to enter the 100 Alchemy Golden Chalice and rely on this high-grade sacred artifact to protect himself. After 10 breaths of time, the thousands of starry swords were shattered by the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, turning into billions of specks of starlight that dissipated in the void. At this moment, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flew out from the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper, panting with lingering fear. He looked at the 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper carefully and realized that it was filled with scratches and dents, even though the Golden Dipper was not broken and could still be used normally. However, the densely packed scratches and dents showed the terrifying power of the starry sword lights, causing the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart to palpitate and his mouth to dry up. Damn it! He did not even use his sacred artifact and he can hurt my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper? This is too terrifying. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint's expression became more serious and a cold light flashed across his eyes. No, I cannot delay time with him. If I continue to be entangled with him, I am afraid my 100 Alchemy Golden Dipper will be broken. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint made up his mind and immediately took out a dark red talisman. Swoosh! When he poured his mana into the talisman immediately burned and turned into a dark red blood light that surged into his body. Instantly, his body expanded violently and in the blink of an eye, he became a giant that was 1,000 feet tall. This giant's body was dark red and its 4 limbs and muscles bulged up like rocks. Its face was ferocious and terrifying and its eyes were dark red like blood. Its body was still burning with dark red flames, and it exuded an extremely violent aura. More importantly, its strength had increased by more than 4 times and it was comparable to a rank 8 martial sage. Roar! The giant beat its chest and let out a carefree and excited roar. Its eyes were red as it stared at Ji Tianqing. It sneered and punched towards him. Ji Tianqing died. Following its deep roar, it punched out 2 fist shadows that were the size of mountains and smashed towards Ji Tianqing from the sky. Ji Tianqing raised his head and glanced at it. He was expressionless as he shouted, "Heavenly Dragon Overlord Body." Instantly, his body shone with bright golden light and his body expanded abruptly, turning into a golden giant that was 1,000 feet tall. The giant that the Heaven Heart Martial Saint had transformed into had a violent and terrifying aura. Ji Tianqing had turned into a golden giant and his aura was sacred and majestic. Star-shattering fist. He was not to be outdone. He raised his fists and punched out 2 starry fist radiances to fight against the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Bang bang! The starry fist radiances and the dark red fist shadows collided violently. Instantly there were 2 deafening explosions. The 4 fist shadows collapsed at the same time and exploded into light fragments that covered the sky and scattered in the void. However, Ji Tianqing's strength was stronger, and he actually sent the Heaven Heart Martial Saint flying backwards. He rolled and smashed into the void 100 miles away. Without waiting for the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint to land, he took the opportunity to use an ultimate technique. Heavenly Dragon Proud Slash. He clasped his palms together and activated 100% of his strength as he slashed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. Chapter 2191. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint had just dissipated the impact and stopped in mid-air. Before he could regulate his breathing and suppress his internal injuries and surging dermic powers, His surroundings were illuminated by a dazzling golden light. He looked up subconsciously and saw a huge golden dragon shadow, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Within the golden dragon shadow, there was a huge golden sword that was 1,000 feet long. Its sword intent was extremely sharp. Oh no! The heavenly heart martial saint's expression changed drastically. A tinge of fear flashed across his eyes. At the critical moment, he controlled the 100 alchemy golden chalice to block above his head. Clang! Almost at the same time, the huge sword slashed onto the 100 alchemy golden chalice and exploded with an earth-shattering sound. At that moment, the huge golden sword exploded into millions of golden fragments. The 100 alchemy golden chalice also had a 3-foot-long dent on it. It tumbled and flew into the distant void. Ji Tianqing's sword was too powerful. It actually sent the 100 alchemy golden chalice flying. It was completely out of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's control. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was instantly shocked. He subconsciously teleported 50 miles away from Ji Tianqing. Even though he had already expected Ji Tianqing's attack to not stop, and wanted to take the opportunity to defeat him, his reaction was fast enough. In the blink of an eye, he had teleported dozens of miles away. However, he still underestimated Ji Tianqing's strength and methods. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing followed him like a shadow and mysteriously appeared behind him. Before he could turn around, Ji Tianqing slapped out a huge golden palm and hit him fiercely. That huge palm was also surrounded by a golden dragon shadow. Its power was unparalleled. Bang! With a deafening explosion, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was hit by the huge palm. He flew out with blood spurting out of his 7 orifices. This time, he did not have the protection of the 100 alchemy golden chalice. Even if he was wearing a saint's soft armor, it was difficult to block the terrifying power of the heavenly dragon palm. His back caved in. Dozens of ribs and bones in his chest were all shattered by the terrifying power. Even his 5 viscera and 6 bowels were shattered and displaced. He drew an arc in the void and fell 50 miles away. As soon as he stood up, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The dark red blood was obviously mixed with pieces of internal organs. The heart-wrenching pain caused the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's face to turn pale. He furrowed his brows tightly and cold sweat broke out all over his body. Due to his heavy injuries, his strength was greatly weakened, and he only had about 60% of his original strength left. However, he still gritted his teeth and refused to admit defeat. He made up his mind that even if he lost, he could not let Ji Tianqing win too easily. At the very least, he had to exhaust Ji Tianqing's mana so that Ji Tianqing would not be able to go all out in the next round. Shocking Sword Codex. Enduring his injuries, he formed a hand seal with both hands and used his trump card. Suddenly, flames surged out of his body and condensed into thousands of flaming swords that pierced towards Ji Tianqing. A look of disdain flashed across Ji Tianqing's eyes. He shouted, showing off in front of an expert. "Let me show you a real sword art." As he spoke, he formed a hand seal and used his ultimate sword art. Sect returning swords. He shouted coldly and formed a mysterious hand seal, releasing a mysterious and invisible power. Instantly, over 100 starry giant swords appeared out of thin air within a radius of several hundred miles. Kill! Hundreds of swords fell like meteors and pointed towards the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. At this moment, the void was completely filled with violent sword chi. 60% of the area was illuminated by the cold starlight. Under the huge swords was the Heaven Heart Martial Saint, whose face was covered with blood. 40% of the area was illuminated by the dazzling flames. Under the thousands of flaming swords was Ji Tianqing, who was unscathed. His expression was cold and indifferent. Such a stark contrast made the 30 or so martial sages, who were watching the battle, secretly break out in cold sweat. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square all had their hearts in their mouths. All of them held their breaths and stared at the light screen without blinking. Everyone knew that this was the trump card battle between Ji Tianqing and the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. After this battle, the victor would be revealed. Bang bang bang. Thousands of flaming swords hit Ji Tianqing one after another, creating a series of loud noises. However, he maintained the Heavenly Dragon Overlord body form, and his whole body shone with golden light. The flaming swords that were as dense as raindrops were all shattered after hitting him. His body only trembled a few times and he was pushed back a few steps by the power of the swords. He did not have any obvious injuries. On the other hand, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint was in a miserable state. Even though he was in his transformed state, he was 1,000 feet tall and his whole body was dark red like fire, filled with a violent aura. However, after the hundreds of swords hit him one after another, his flesh and blood flew everywhere as he screamed in pain. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was pushed back 10 miles by the swords. His left arm was crushed by the sword radiance and his right wrist was cut off by the swords. Even his chest and back were covered with holes and wounds, and dark red blood was spurting out of them. His whole body was covered with blood, and he was in a miserable state. He did not look like a human anymore. He looked like a piece of minced meat that had been slaughtered. Seeing this scene, the many martial sages on the round plate sighed silently in their hearts. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the Sky City Square finally let out a relieved expression. They cheered and discussed loudly. Everyone knew that the victor had been decided. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was injured to this extent. He had already lost. However, before he admitted defeat, the battle was not over. More than half of the hundreds of starry swords were shattered. The remaining swords immediately gathered together under the control of Ji Tianqing, and condensed into a huge sword that was 1,000 feet long. Slash! He shouted with a cold expression and pointed his right hand at the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. That terrifyingly huge sword descended from the sky and slashed towards the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint. With the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's condition, he could not dodge it. Once he was hit by the huge sword, his body would be destroyed. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. At this moment of life and death, the Heaven Heart Martial Saint's heart was filled with despair and shock. He did not dare to force himself and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! I admit defeat." This hoarse shout was filled with an incomparably anxious tone. It was as deafening as rolling thunder. The many martial sages on the white light disc all heard it clearly. Immediately, strange expressions appeared on their faces. Similar thoughts appeared in everyone's mind. If you admit defeat, just admit defeat. Why do you shout so loudly? Do you want everyone to hear you? I've never seen anyone admit defeat. How could he have the nerve to shout so loudly and confidently? Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. He waved his right hand and controlled the huge sword to stop. Swoosh! The huge sword stopped in front of the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. It was only 3 feet away from his head. The blade of the sword was right in front of his eyes. The cold and sharp sword aura enveloped him, causing him to feel cold all over. His mind was blank. Chapter 2192. The giant star sword had yet to disappear, and was still emitting a terrifying sword chi. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's body froze on the spot and he did not dare to move. After a long time, when the giant star sword disappeared, he heaved a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He revealed a grateful expression as if he had just survived a disaster. He relaxed and felt that the energy in his body was like flowing water, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. His limbs and bones were in pain and his mind and consciousness were dizzy. He finally could not hold on any longer and his body went limp as he lay in the void, panting heavily. Ji Tianqing glanced at him coldly and turned to leave the void. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's pathetic state was witnessed by all the martial saints and hundreds of thousands of practitioners. Instantly, the martial saints on the round plate started discussing. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint is a 7th realm martial saint. How could he be so frightened? The duel between the two of them just now was simply exquisite beyond compare. In comparison, Ji Tianqing's sword skills were even more marvelous. Heaven's Heart Martial Saint's sword skills seemed to be imitating him, and it was very clumsy. A few young martial saints discussed secretly, not daring to let the people from Heaven's End God Nation hear them. Yuan Chang's face was as cold as ice as he cursed angrily. Useless trash, how could he be so frightened by Ji Tianqing? He really embarrassed me. In the square of sky-gazing city, the sounds of discussion were like a tsunami, deafening. Oh my God! This is definitely the most exciting duel in this sacred assembly. The sword skills of the two martial saints are simply superb and have reached the peak. Ji Tianqing's sword skills are obviously more profound. He really has the style of Qin Shin. There are rumors in the martial world that he is the successor of Qin Shin, but no one believed it. Today, after seeing him display his sword skills, I can confirm that he is definitely the successor. Speaking of which, Heaven's Heart Martial Saint is a great martial saint who has been famous for many years. He is powerful and has a respected status. But he was so scared by Ji Tianqing that he was in such a sorry state. After all, he had walked through the gates of hell and was almost killed by Ji Tianqing's sword. How could he not be afraid? So even martial saints are afraid of death. I thought that those high and mighty martial sages were like deities. One is the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint and the other is the Tianqing Martial Saint. Their names are somewhat similar, but their strengths are different. Just so happens that the two of them met. Seems to be quite interesting. Many martial artists in the square discussed heatedly for a long time. On the void platform on the white light disc, Ji Tianqing calmly returned to Lu Baishuang's side and smiled at her. Are you satisfied with this result? Lu Baishuang looked at the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint in the air. Seeing him in such a sorry state like a dead dog, a look of relief appeared in his eyes. The anger and hatred that had accumulated in his heart finally dissipated. She turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing and smiled warmly like a spring breeze. She nodded heavily. This smile made Ji Tianqing stunned. It also made Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian dumbfounded. The two of them looked at each other and whispered softly, Holy Emperor Baishuang can actually smile? Aren't you talking nonsense? Who doesn't know how to smile? It's just that Holy Emperor Baishuang has always been as cold as ice. No one has ever seen her smile before. That's true. Looks like young Master Ji's charm is great enough to melt the ice mountain. Not long after, the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint left the void platform in a sorry state. This round of competition had ended. Next, Chaoing Qingshan Martial Saint and the Heavenly Heart Martial Saint had to compete for the 5th place. The Heavenly Heart Martial Saint was severely injured. His physical body was on the verge of collapse and his strength was extremely weak. He no longer had the strength to continue fighting. He could only give up and settle for the 7th place. Chaoing and the Qingshan Martial Saint went up to the void platform and started a not-so-intense battle. The two of them had a harmonious relationship. One was the Holy Emperor of the Heaven End Divine Nation, and the other was a citizen of the Heaven End Divine Nation. Both of them loved Yuan Zhen. So far, there had been no injuries or deaths in their fight. After exchanging over 100 blows, Chaoing admitted defeat. Thus, Chaoing was ranked 6th and the Qingshan Martial Saint was ranked 5th. Next, it was the final round of competition. This was the final battle of the Martial Saint rankings. It would also be the most intense and exciting. No matter if it was the martial saints on the round plate or the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the sky-gazing city, they were all filled with anticipation. Yuan Zhan held the identity jade slips of Ji Tianqing, Tai Hao Yunqi, Atal and Yuan Chong and threw them into the air. Granny Yulong walked out and said with a kind face, although there are only 4 martial saints left in the last round of competition and drawing lots doesn't mean much, I still have to do it. I'll help the 4 of you draw lots to decide your opponents. After saying that, she waved her hand and shot out 2 rays of golden light, splitting the 4 jade slips into 2 and bringing them in front of her. Then, she read out with a serious expression. The results of the last round of competition are as follows. The first round, Ji Tianqing versus Atal. The second round, Tai Hao Yunqi versus Yuan Chong. The 2 winners will continue to fight for the 1st and 2nd place. The 2 defeated martial saints will also have to fight for the 3rd and 4th place. As soon as she finished speaking, the red-haired alien King Atal stepped into the void platform first. He stood in the void with a calm expression, holding a dark golden scepter inlaid with gems in his hand. Dark red flames danced in his eyes. Seeing Ji Tianqing enter the void and stand 1,000 feet away from him, he stroked his beard and said, Martial Saint Tianqing, please draw your sword. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, my sword Dao has reached perfection. I don't need a sword. Oh. Atal raised his eyebrows and said regretfully, so you're going to fight me empty-handed? I won't be able to see the divine sword? Ji Tianqing frowned. What do you mean? Atal hammered his chest with his right hand and bowed to him. He explained, I admired Kenshin very much when I was young. It is this emperor's fortune to be able to meet you. It is this emperor's honor to be able to spar with you. Also, I'm very interested in the legendary divine sword, the Burial of Heaven. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see it. Now that I've heard that the divine sword is in your hands, I wonder if you can show it to me and fulfill one of my wishes? Ji Tianqing looked at him deeply and said indifferently, your expression and tone are very sincere. It doesn't seem like you're lying. I'm willing to believe your intentions. But unfortunately, I can't agree to your request. Atal's face was filled with disappointment. He said regretfully, what a pity. Since that's the case, I'll go all out and force you to use the divine sword. Chapter 2193. Atal did not waste any more time. He immediately waved his scepter and performed a powerful secret skill, Heavenly Fire Backflow. He formed a seal with his left hand and waved his dark golden scepter with his right. He let out a low roar and released endless red heavenly fire. Boom! The dark red heavenly fire covered the sky and poured down from the void. It was like endless seawater pouring into a whirlpool. It immediately drowned Ji Tianqing's figure. Ji Tianqing was in the middle of the heavenly fire whirlpool, but he was not worried at all. He secretly activated his dermic powers, and his body lit up with a faint golden light. His entire body became real and illusory as he entered a translucent state. The endless red heavenly fire crazily washed over his body. However, he was calm as usual and did not feel any pain. He also did not perform a counterattack. Atal's expression changed when he saw this. He used all his strength to activate the heavenly fire and formed dozens of fire dragons to attack Ji Tianqing. Bam bam bam. However, Ji Tianqing was still unharmed after being hit by dozens of fire dragons. He waved his hand and shot out dozens of giant golden palms, smashing the fire dragons into pieces. Soon 10 breaths passed. Atal unleashed the power of his secret technique to the limit, but he still could not harm Ji Tianqing in the slightest. He had no choice but to withdraw his secret skill in frustration. After the endless heavenly fire dissipated, he was not in a hurry to attack. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a puzzled expression and asked, Martial Sage Tianqing, why didn't you counterattack? Ji Tianqing said calmly, not long ago, I mastered a secret skill and wanted to test it on your heavenly fire. The effect is not bad. Atal was shocked and asked in disbelief, I'm not boasting, but I was born with the ability to control all the flames in the world. After reaching the martial sage realm, I was able to control the most terrifying heavenly fire. Not to mention flesh and blood, I can even use the heavenly fire to melt a sacred weapon into molten iron. Martial Saint Tianqing, what kind of secret technique have you cultivated to be able to disregard this emperor's heavenly flame? Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said calmly, it's a special sword body. I can only tell you this much. I can't tell you anything else. Sword body? A strange look flashed across Atal's eyes as he asked with more excitement, could it be the great achievement sword body created by Kenshin and passed down to the world? That secret skill was spread from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, and was regarded as a Sword Dao treasure book by millions of Sword Dao martial artists. It is truly an unimaginable Sword Dao absolute art. Ji Tianqing looked at him coldly and said in a deep voice, you talk too much? Atal's expression froze, and he was a little embarrassed. However, he quickly returned to normal and said with a smile, Martial Saint Tianqing, why don't we make a deal? As long as you tell me whether or not you are the reincarnation of Kenshin, and let me see the sword of Burial of Heaven, I will immediately admit defeat. This way you can win without using any power. It will be very beneficial for your upcoming battles. Without a doubt, the deal that Atal proposed was extremely tempting. However, Ji Tianqing did not even consider it and said directly, no need. If I want to defeat you, it will only take a moment. I won't use much power. Atal frowned and his face darkened. He said angrily, Martial Saint Tianqing, I am so polite to you, but you are so arrogant. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being rude. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, bring it on. Soul-burning purple flame. Atal shouted angrily and held the dark golden staff tightly with both hands. He released endless dark purple flames towards Ji Tianqing. The dark purple flames that covered the sky condensed into 6 huge purple dragons in the void and attacked Ji Tianqing from all directions. Atal knew that ordinary earth fire and heaven fire could not do anything to Ji Tianqing. Therefore, he directly used his strongest trump card and released his ultimate skill, soul-burning purple flame. The dark purple flames looked dazzling, but they were extremely cold and were specially used to suppress the divine soul of a martial saint. Once the divine soul came into contact with the purple flames, it would be burned to ashes. In less serious cases, the divine soul would be injured and their strength would decrease greatly. In more serious cases, the divine soul would be destroyed on the spot and they would die forever. However, Ji Tianqing's expression did not change when he saw the 6 purple fire dragons flying towards him. He raised his left hand and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Stars!" Instantly, hundreds of star flames appeared in the void, turning into silver dragon shadows that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, flying towards the 6 purple fire dragons. Bang! 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 The hundreds of star dragon shadows collided with the 6 purple fire dragons, and a series of muffled sounds rang out. The 2 completely different dragon shadows tangled in the void and consumed each other. Ji Tianqing raised his right hand again and pointed at the void. He shouted coldly, "Lightning!" Suddenly, a 3,000-meter-tall 5-colored divine lightning bolt descended from the void and struck at Atal's head. The 5-colored divine lightning beam contained 5 different types of lightning, and its power was terrifying to the extreme. Atal frowned and blocked his head with the dark golden staff. He sneered, "Haha, it's just lightning. Which martial saint would be afraid of lightning?" It was true that every martial saint had to undergo the baptism and test of the 9 heavenly tribulations. Everyone had been struck by lightning many times. Not only could they resist the power of the lightning, but some martial saints could even absorb and control the lightning. However, when the 5-colored lightning bolt struck Atal, it was too late for him to regret. Boom! Crack! With a deafening boom, the huge pillar of divine lightning drowned Atal's figure. The shield released by the dark golden staff was shattered on the spot. Even the scepter was sent flying and fell into the void. Atal was also burned black and smoking by the 5-colored lightning bolt. He screamed and fell into the void. Just a moment ago, he was wearing a golden robe and a crown. He was holding a luxurious and exquisite staff and looked like a noble king of a foreign tribe. But now he had turned into charcoal. Black smoke was coming out of his nose and mouth, making him look like a burnt chicken. Cough! Cough! He endured the dizziness and pain. As soon as he got up, he coughed out a few mouthfuls of black blood. He looked down at his chest and arms and saw that his clothes had been burned to ashes. His skin and flesh were also burned black and dry. Black ashes fell off when he rubbed them. Damn it! He was shocked and angry. He glared at Ji Tianqing coldly. At this moment, Ji Tianqing raised his right hand and pointed his index and middle fingers at him like a sword. Sky-piercing finger. A cold light shot out from the tip of his finger and disappeared into the void. Atal sensed danger coming. His pupils shrank and he instinctively teleported to dodge. However, he underestimated Ji Tianqing's speed. Boom! In the dull sound, a silver light burst out from his chest and blew up countless black fragments and dust. The black ashes and fragments were his flesh and bones. Chapter 2194. When Atal steadied himself, he found that his chest and abdomen were empty, with only a pitch-black spine connecting them. His skin, flesh, bone marrow, meridians, and organs were all shattered and disappeared. All that was left was a half-black and half-red heart. It was still beating, and dark red blood was constantly flowing out. You! Atal's eyes widened in fear, looking at Ji Tianqing in shock. Previously, he was struck by the 5-colored lightning, and his body was numb. Now that his body was so heavily injured, he couldn't feel any pain. This was too terrifying. At the same time, Ji Tianqing took a step forward and appeared in front of him, staring coldly at him. You've already lost. Atal was shocked and angry. His body trembled, gritting his teeth as he shouted, No, this emperor hasn't. Ji Tianqing said indifferently, If you don't admit defeat, you will die in the next move. Atal's body shook, and he became much more clear-headed, his anger dissipating. He had to admit that Ji Tianqing's words were arrogant and confident, but he was right. He was already so heavily injured. If he continued to resist, he might really lose his life. With Ji Tianqing's strength and methods, he would definitely do what he said. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head with a dejected expression, and said in a hoarse voice, "This emperor admits defeat." It was just 4 words, but it seemed to have used up all his strength. After speaking, he used his magic power to wrap around his broken body, and staggered away from the void. When he returned to the round plate where everyone was gathered, he inadvertently glanced at Yuan Zhan, an apologetic look flashing through his eyes. Yuan Zhan's expression didn't change, as if he didn't notice. But in reality, his fists in his sleeves were clenched, and the veins on the back of his hands were bulging. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, didn't hide as well as he did. His brows furrowed, and a cold light flashed through his eyes. Damn bastard. We used both soft and hard methods, but he still didn't take the bait, and didn't show any signs. Your Highness, although we released the news, and let everyone know that Ji Tianqing is Kenshin's reincarnation. However, when everyone heard this news, they were all skeptical. We still can't find any conclusive evidence to prove Ji Tianqing's identity. Yuan Zhan transmitted his voice with an indifferent tone. We acted too hastily and made it too obvious. Ji Tianqing sensed our hostility, so he was very cautious and vigilant. It's normal that he didn't reveal any flaws. Qin Zheng was stunned for a moment and asked doubtfully, "Then what should we do? Could it be that we can't do anything to him, and allow him to take first place in the sacred assembly?" "Haha, how is that possible?" Yuan Zhan sneered and said in a cold voice, "Since Ji Tianqing has already seen through our intentions, we'll make sure he doesn't return. I must obtain the sword of burial of heaven." Qin Zheng hesitated for a moment before asking solemnly, "Your Highness, are we really going to use that plan?" Right now, the Void platform was in full view of everyone. He's a popular figure in the Luoshui divine nation. If something happens to him here, we won't be able to escape. If I'm not worried, what are you worried about? Yuan Zhan turned his head and glanced at him and sneered. As long as we can obtain the sword of burial of heaven and obtain the mystery of Father's ascension, everything will be worth it. Moreover, Ji Tianqing's accident is an accident. What does it have to do with us? For the past 300 years, the Void platform has been unstable and accidents happen frequently. This is something everyone knows. Yuan Zhan did not continue his words. As for the plan, he had already discussed it with Qin Zheng and both of them were well aware of it. Soon, the second round of the competition began. Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong entered the Void platform one after another, and started a fierce battle. Both of them had special identities. One was the 7th god son of the vast divine nation, while the other was the 4th god son of the heaven end divine nation. Moreover, both of them had reached the rank 7 martial sage realm, and had mastered powerful secret skills. Naturally, this battle was incomparably exciting. The sky was filled with spiritual light, and it lit up the void for hundreds of miles, forming a dazzling scene. Various secret skills and martial skills were displayed by the two of them, and it was a feast for the eyes of the spectators. Not only were the hundreds of thousands of martial artists captivated by the battle, even the many martial sages on the round plate were excited and their eyes were dazzled. This exciting and intense battle lasted for a full hour. In the end, Taihao Yunqi was defeated by Yuan Chong by a single move. This result was not out of everyone's expectations. After Taihao Yunqi and Yuan Chong left the void, Yuan Zhan announced loudly, "For this round of battle, Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong have won. Next, Taihao Yunqi and Atal will fight for the 3rd and 4th place. As for the 1st and 2nd place, it will be decided by the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong." As Yuan Zhan's voice fell, Taihao Yunqi stepped into the light door and entered the dark void. Although he had used up a lot of his spiritual powers in the battle with Yuan Chong, he was also seriously injured. However, he refused to give up and insisted on entering the arena. Atal's injuries were even more serious and his strength was reduced by 40 to 50%. He was in a terrible state. Originally, he was still hesitating whether he should enter the arena to fight. Seeing Taihao Yunqi enter the arena with injuries, he could not just admit defeat. He could only enter the void. The battle between the two of them was not too intense. After all, both of them had suffered heavy injuries. After exchanging more than 1,000 moves, Atal was sent flying by Taihao Yunqi, and his injuries were even more serious. Atal thought about it for a while and admitted defeat. As a result, Taihao Yunqi became the third place of the Sacred Assembly. The fourth place was naturally Atal. 3 of the top 5 places of the Sacred Assembly had been decided. Only the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong would be settled. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the white light round plate became heavy. More than 30 martial sages' gazes were focused on the two of them. In the square of Wangtian City, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were also staring at the screen, looking forward to the battle between Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong. Everyone knew that this would be the last battle of this Sacred Assembly, and it would definitely be the most exciting battle. Everyone had doubts in their hearts. Would Yuan Chong be better and continue to be in the first place? Or would the shining new star Ji Tianqing replace Yuan Chong? Under everyone's gaze, Yuan Chong was the first to enter the void. He stood in the void with his arms crossed in front of his chest, revealing a confident expression and exuding an invisible majesty. Ji Tianqing entered the void with a calm expression and stood 10 miles in front of Yuan Chong. Before he spoke, Yuan Chong sneered and said, "Ji Tianqing, all of us have underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be able to win all the way until now and even have the chance to fight with me. However, meeting this seat, your luck ends here." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said in a calm tone, "Unfortunately, it's your misfortune to have met me." Chapter 2195. Ji Tianqing's expression and tone were very calm. He was neither bluffing nor shouting. It was as if he was stating a fact. Because of this, Yuan Chong frowned and his face was as cold as ice. Since the beginning of the Sacred Assembly, Ji Tianqing's performance had made him feel deeply afraid and threatened. He had purposely said those words just now to bluff and boost his confidence. However, Ji Tianqing was still as arrogant as ever, which made him furious. He didn't want to waste any more time. With a clang, he pulled out his sword and shouted coldly, "Ji Tianqing, cut the crap. I'd like to see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance." Ji Tianqing naturally didn't bother to argue with him. He didn't use the Burial of Heaven sword either. He made a sword sign with his right hand and pointed to the void. "Sword, come." Following his cold shout, a cold silver light immediately lit up in the void above his head. Swoosh! A 1,000-meter-long starry sword, carrying a mountain-sized white tiger phantom, descended from the sky and slashed down. Roar! The white tiger phantom was quite lifelike, exuding a murderous aura that could destroy everything. Yuan Chong was enveloped by the cold and sharp sword intent. He felt a stabbing pain all over his body, as if his skin and flesh were about to burst open. He clenched his teeth and held the sword with a gloomy face. He used all his strength to counterattack. Scattered Stars chess piece. With a cold shout, he waved his sword and slashed out hundreds of silver sword lights. They intertwined into a big net in the void and formed a mysterious sword array. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. More than 600 silver sword lights, like dazzling starlight, were arranged in a special way and flew back and forth as fast as lightning. Yuan Chong was in the middle of the sword array. He could attack or retreat. Kaboom! In the next moment, the white tiger sacred sword fell from the sky and slammed into the Scattered Stars chess piece sword array. There was a thunderous sound. Suddenly, the silver starlight bloomed, and the silver light fragments covered the sky. A silver shockwave spread out like a wave and spread in all directions. The white tiger phantom and the giant sword were both destroyed and quickly dissipated. The scattered sword formation was also shattered, and Yuan Chong was forced to retreat over 10 miles. Fortunately, the sword formation blocked most of the white tiger sacred sword's power. Moreover, he had a high-grade saint artifact to protect him. That was why he had managed to escape unscathed. After the shockwave swept out, Yuan Chong's figure appeared. He held the sword in his hand and stood in the void, panting heavily. His eyes were like knives as he stared at Ji Tianqing. His eyes were filled with fear. The strongest defense is actually offense. As this thought flashed through his mind, He decided not to passively defend anymore. Instead, he decided to go all out and take the initiative to attack. Solitary star, fiendish moon. Yuan Chang's voice was as loud as a large bell. Dazzling starlight burst from his body as he gripped the sword with both of his hands and fiercely hacked out a 3,000 meters long beam of light. The light blade was like a crescent moon cutting through the void, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill as it slashed down towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's expression did not change as he calmly said, "A firefly dares to compete with the bright moon?" Yuan Chang was only a martial sage, but he was able to absorb and use the power of the stars. That was unbelievable. That was why he had been able to suppress Tai Hao Yunqi, Atal, and the rest and had been ranked first in the sacred assembly. However, the star martial skill that he had cultivated was created by martial god Tianju, and he had personally taught it to him. To Ji Tianqing, the star martial skill that martial god Tianju had created was too crude. Vermilion Bird Sacred Sword. He stared coldly at Yuan Chang as he raised his right hand and pointed at the void. Suddenly, the void lit up with dazzling sparks, forming a 3,000 meters long giant sword. The giant vermilion bird phantom slashed down viciously. The power of the stars was also divided into yin and yang. The sun star and the ordinary stars belonged to yin while the power of the sun star belonged to yang. Ji Tianqing's vermilion bird sacred sword was formed by the sun true fire, and its power was extraordinary. Kaboom! In the next instant, the vermilion bird sacred sword and the white moon light blade collided and a loud explosion shook the void. In that instant, the white moon light blade shattered. The vermilion bird phantom and the giant flaming sword also collapsed. Billions of crimson and silver-white fragments of light burst forth in the void, like the most brilliant fireworks, causing people to gasp in amazement. The 30-odd martial sages on the round plate were all dazzled by this scene. Their faces were filled with astonishment. Even the powerful veteran martial sages were full of admiration as they whispered in each other's ears. It is indeed a battle between the strong. It is so exciting. With Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chang's strength, they have both mastered the power of the stars. It is unbelievable. The power of the stars is more powerful than the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It is also more difficult to refine and absorb. There is a risk of being burned to death. I wonder how they have mastered it. The two of them seem to be evenly matched. It is hard to tell who will win. Although I think highly of the fourth prince from the current situation, it seems that Ji Tianqing has the upper hand. Don't forget that Yuan Chang has used a sacred artifact. Can be said that he has gone all out. Ji Tianqing, on the other hand, didn't even use a single saint artifact. Just as the crowd was discussing, the starlight in the void dissipated. They saw Ji Tianqing standing in the same place, unharmed. Yuan Chang's hair was disheveled as he stood in the void 80 miles away. Blood was still dripping from the corner of his mouth. Although he didn't look injured on the surface, in reality, he had already suffered internal injuries from the shock. Before he could make another move, Ji Tianqing used a secret technique and attacked him. Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword. Ji Tianqing raised his finger again, and a giant sword that was 1,000 feet long descended from the sky. It carried the shadow of a green dragon and slammed down. The Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword's aura was full of divine majesty, and had the power to suppress everything. Yuan Chang's expression was solemn. He had no choice but to take out a silver cauldron to block the sacred sword's attack. Boom! The sword light exploded and the Azure Dragon phantom dissipated. The silver cauldron was also sent flying. Yuan Chang's body shook again and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Ji Tianqing did not give him any time to suppress his injuries. He raised his hands again and used a mysterious technique. Sword Rain. As he shouted, tens of thousands of starlight sword lights appeared in the void and poured down like a storm, drowning Yuan Chang's figure. Bang! 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 A series of muffled booms rang out incessantly, causing ripples to appear in the void. Yuan Chang tried his best to block with all his means and Dharma treasures. However, the starlight sword lights formed a sword formation under Ji Tianqing's control and continued to stab him, making it impossible for him to defend. In just 20 breaths of time, Yuan Chang was stabbed hundreds of times by the sword lights. His golden robe had long been torn and his protective soft armor was also broken. There were wounds on his chest, back and limbs and blood kept spurting out. Seeing this scene, many martial sages sighed silently. Everyone knew that Yuan Chong was about to lose. In terms of strength and attainments in sword Dao, he was far inferior to Ji Tianqing. Yuan Zhen frowned and stared coldly at the void, paying attention to the situation of the battle. At this moment, seeing that Yuan Chong was in a difficult situation and his injuries were worsening, he finally made up his mind. A cold light flashed in his eyes. He ordered Qin Zheng behind him in a cold and indifferent tone. Do it. Qin Zheng had been waiting for this moment. When he heard the order, he did not hesitate to withdraw his left hand into his sleeve. He grabbed an exquisite palm-sized jade pendant and crushed it. This jade pendant had a strange structure. It was connected to the void platform's formation and could be used to control the formation. Chapter 2196. Without any warning, the void crack and the hurricane appeared at the same time. Ji Tianqing's figure was immediately swallowed by the hurricane and disappeared into the pitch-black void crack. Swoosh! More than a dozen terrifying void windstorms surged out of the void crack and wreaked havoc on the void platform like tornadoes. Even a martial sage expert could not withstand the power of the void windstorms and was about to be crushed into pieces. Ji Tianqing's starry sword light had already collapsed and dissipated. Yuan Chong, who was covered in blood, was finally out of danger. He rushed out in a sorry state, his hair disheveled and his expression sorrowful and terrified. There was not an inch of his body that was unharmed. However, he did not have time to catch his breath or suppress his injuries. Just as the thought of being relieved of a heavy burden appeared in his heart, it immediately dissipated. He saw with his own eyes that several huge void windstorms were sweeping toward him and were about to swallow his figure. At this moment, his eyes suddenly widened and a look of realization flashed across his eyes. He subconsciously turned his head and looked at Yuan Zhen, who was on the white light disk. Obviously, he guessed that Ji Tianqing's disappearance and the appearance of the void windstorms were definitely not coincidental. It was his big brother Yuan Zhen who had manipulated them. He was both shocked and angry, and a strange thought flashed across his mind. Damn Yuan Zhen. In order to deal with Ji Tianqing, he is even willing to sacrifice my life? Damn it. He must have calculated that as long as he can kill Ji Tianqing, even if he has to sacrifice me, the Divine Son, Father will not pursue him. In the next moment, a void windstorm thousands of feet high swallowed Yuan Chong's figure. He was seriously injured and had no time to dodge or escape. He was immediately torn into pieces by the void windstorm. Even if he was a martial sage expert and had an extremely strong physical body, in the void windstorm, he was still as fragile as paper. Without the protection of his physical body, his divine soul did not last long before it was swallowed by the void windstorm and completely disappeared. Yuan Chong died. His physical body and divine soul both collapsed and dissipated. More than a dozen void windstorms raged on the void platform for 100 breaths of time before they gradually subsided. As for the many martial sages on the round plate, they were all dumbfounded by the scene before them. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared at the void platform in shock. They were so shocked that they couldn't speak. A moment ago, Ji Tianqing and Yuan Chong were still fighting fiercely in the sky, using their amazing secret arts. But now Ji Tianqing had been swallowed up by the void crack, vanishing without a trace. Yuan Chong was even killed by the void storm, not even leaving behind a trace of him. The void gradually calmed down and returned to its cold and dark state. However, the shock in the hearts of the many martial sages did not subside for a long time. At the edge of the disk, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Changtian stared at the sky in shock. It's over. Young Master Ji has been swallowed by the void. What's going on? Why is this happening? Mu Changtian and Zhuo Mingqi were filled with grief and indignation as they shouted in confusion. Lu Baishuang pursed her lips tightly, her body trembling, and she could not help but shed 2 lines of tears. Why is this happening? What's going on? Young Master Ji, why is he being swallowed by the void? Her eyes were lifeless as she murmured, her voice low and sorrowful. Seeing Ji Tianqing being swallowed by the void, Her mind and strength seemed to have been sucked away. The other martial sages gradually regained their senses as they discussed in shock and confusion. Oh my god! Why would there be a crack in the void? The fourth prince and Ji Tianqing were fighting for first place. Why would they both vanish? It's over. The fourth prince has been killed by the void storm and Ji Tianqing has been swallowed by the void. He will definitely die. Many years ago, I heard that the void platform had been damaged and its power had become unstable. There have been many accidents. I just didn't expect that there would be an accident today. It was not only the martial sages on the disc who were discussing with mixed feelings. Even the hundreds of thousands of martial artists on the Sky City Square gradually recovered from their shock and silence. Everyone exclaimed in shock and helplessness as they whispered to each other. No one could accept this. This sudden calamity actually ruined the most exciting duel, taking away the lives of two genius martial sages. At this moment, Yuan Zhan, who was on the white disc, finally recovered from his shock. He stared at the void with bloodshot eyes and roared hysterically. Fourth brother! This sincere cry was full of sorrow and regret, causing the hearts of many martial sages to tremble as sorrow welled up in them. Why is this happening? Fourth brother, why is the heavens treating you like this? It's all my fault. I didn't supervise you properly and caused you to suffer such a disaster. Yuan Zhan bent over in pain as he roared in tears, as if he was extremely sad about Yuan Chang's death. Qin Zheng, who was standing behind him, saw Yuan Zhan's sorrowful look and hurriedly comforted him. First Prince, my condolences. This is an unexpected situation. It's not something you can control. Don't blame yourself. Qin Zheng supported Yuan Zhan and comforted him with a sincere tone. However, Yuan Zhan seemed to be too sad. He cried for a long time and only calmed down when his voice became hoarse. The more than 30 martial sages on the disc all had heavy hearts. Marshal Saint Qingshan, Chaoying, and the others all comforted Yuan Zhan. Yuan Zhan gradually woke up. He suppressed the sorrow in his heart and wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. He walked back to the center of the disc with heavy steps and announced with a solemn expression, "Everyone, this sacred assembly has ended. Unfortunately, there is no first or second place in this sacred assembly. As everyone knows, the void stage was damaged hundreds of years ago and its power is very unstable. Although the craftsmen of our country tried their best to maintain and repair it, it was to no avail. Occasionally, unexpected situations would occur. Unfortunately, an accident happened today and caused the death of Yuan Chong and Ji Tianqing. This perhaps is the will of the heavens. The heavens are jealous of the talents." Yuan Zhan was silent for a long time as if he was too sad to speak. Lu Baishuang, who had been in a daze and tears, suddenly rushed out of the crowd and shouted at Yuan Zhan, "No, Ji Tianqing is not dead. He will definitely not die. This is not an accident. This is your conspiracy. You want to kill him. You want to kill him on purpose." As soon as she said this, the martial sages on the disc all quieted down. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Lu Baishuang with a strange expression. Yuan Zhan glanced at her and said indifferently, "Holy Emperor Baishuang, Ji Tianqing was swallowed by the void storm and will die without a doubt. You have deep feelings for Ji Tianqing. I can understand your feelings. Just like how my fourth brother died in an accident, I am so sad that I wish I were dead. However, I hope you can stay rational and not go crazy. Don't slander me." Chapter 2197. Yuan Zhan's expression and tone were both calm and cold. The martial sages could not help but nod in agreement. They all began to reprimand Lu Baishuang. "Holy Emperor Baishuang, everyone can understand that you're overly sad. However, it's too unreasonable for you to pester endlessly like this. You slandered His Highness for plotting to kill Ji Tianqing. However, His Highness Fourth Highness also died in an accident. Does His Highness want to harm his own brother? His Highness has always been generous and kind. He loves his brothers and sisters even more. Everyone saw that His Highness Fourth Highness died in an accident. His Highness is heartbroken and in great pain. Holy Emperor Baishuang, you have lost your mind. His Highness did not care about your slanderous words. Why don't you thank him? Where are the people of Luoshui Divine Nation? Take Holy Emperor Baishuang away. Don't let her fool around here. The martial sages all began to reprimand Lu Baishuang. They even asked Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian to take her away. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian looked troubled. They sent messages to Lu Baishuang to console her. Holy Emperor Baishuang, it has already happened. My condolences. Maybe the heavens are jealous of your talent. If young Master Ji is in heaven, he would not want to see you so sad. Lu Baishuang immediately turned to glare at the two of them. She shouted crazily, "Shut up! What nonsense are you two talking about? The heavens are jealous of my talent? I do not believe it. Young Master Ji will not die. He is definitely still alive. I also don't believe that this is an accident. Of all times, why did it have to happen now of all times? How can there be such a coincidence in this world?" Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were speechless. They did not know how to persuade her. However, Lu Baishuang's angry shout was heard clearly by the martial sages. The young martial sages from various countries shook their heads and started to discuss. "Sai, it seems like Holy Emperor Baishuang has been traumatized. Her mind is muddled. I didn't expect that this woman, who is as cold as a mountain, would be so sentimental. She is so infatuated. What a pity. People of Luoshui Divine Nation, what are you waiting for? Why aren't you taking her away? Are you going to let her go crazy here and embarrass your god nation?" Yuan Zhan saw that everyone was attacking Lu Baishuang one-sidedly, and his eyes flashed with an imperceptible sneer as he thought to himself, fourth brother, if you want to put on a show, you have to go all the way. Only the trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's confidence is the most convincing. I believe that your spirit in heaven will forgive Big Brother for doing this. By sacrificing you, we can kill Ji Tianxing and obtain the mystery of ascension that Godfather wants the most. Godfather will thank you for your sacrifice. After the thought flashed through his mind, he announced in a loud and expressionless voice, "Everyone, I'm not feeling well and I'm not in a good mood. I still have to prepare for my fourth brother's funeral, so I'll take my leave first." After saying that, Yuan Zhen waved his hand and cast a spell, activating the formation on the disc. And after passing through this light gate, they would be able to return to Wangtian City. Seeing that Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng were about to leave, the martial saints shook their heads and prepared to leave. But at this moment, Lu Baishuang angrily rushed out and blocked the door of light, blocking Yuan Zhen's path. "Yuan Zhen, how could you just walk away like that after such a big matter? Ji Tianxing is our nation's heavenly imperial guardian. Don't you have anything to say to him?" Yuan Zhan stopped and looked at her expressionlessly. He shouted, "I've already said that this was an accident. Ji Tianxing was swallowed by the void. Everyone saw it with their own eyes. Now that things have come to this, what explanation can I give you? You are crazy. I have been patient, but you want a yard. If you continue to pester me, don't blame me for being impolite." Qin Zheng also stepped forward and glared at Lu Baishuang. "Lu Baishuang, you have heard His Highness' words. Get out of the way, or I will not be polite to you." Lu Baishuang immediately sneered. "Ha ha ha. So you have shown your true face? I want to see how you are going to be impolite. In any case, I won't leave until I get to the bottom of this matter and find Ji Tianxing. All the martial saints present today will not leave either." The martial saints frowned and stared at Lu Baishuang angrily. "Hey, you crazy woman, what do you want to do? This is the Heavens End Divine Kingdom, not the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. You can't behave so atrociously here. Ji Tianxing died in an accident, but you want to stop all of us. You are simply unreasonable. Why are you still talking nonsense with her? Throw her out of the void stage. The Saint Emperor of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom is crazy. How ridiculous." Qin Zheng took advantage of the crowd's discussion to cast a meaningful glance at several young martial saints. Suddenly, the young martial saints who were filled with righteous indignation joined forces to capture Lu Baishuang. But at this moment, Taihao Yunqi, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "Wait." His voice was not loud, but it contained a powerful calmness and confidence. He walked out of the crowd with Jijiu, came to the white light door, and stood beside Yuan Zhen. The martial saints of the various countries quieted down and looked at him with confusion. Yuan Zhen also stared at him and asked, "Taihao Yunqi, what do you want to say?" Taihao Yunqi revealed a faint smile and said in a calm tone, Yuan Zhan, what happened just now was out of everyone's expectations. But you insist that it was an accident and come to a conclusion with just a few words. Isn't this too hasty? Yuan Zhan raised his eyebrows and asked coldly, Taihao Yunqi, what do you mean? Do you want to slander me too? Oh. Taihao Yunqi shook his head and said with a smile, before there is conclusive evidence, I will not suspect anyone. But what I want to say is that this matter should not be handled this way. Yuan Chong was killed by the void storm in front of everyone's eyes. But Ji Tianqing did not die on the spot. He was just swallowed by the void and disappeared without a trace. Regardless of whether this matter was plotted by someone or just an accident, it was definitely related to the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation. Yuan Zhan, as the host of the Sacred Assembly, you can't stay out of this alone. Hearing his words, the 30 or so martial sages fell silent. Yuan Zhan could not refute and could only frown and ask, Taihao Yunqi, what do you want? Taihao Yunqi said with a serious face, it's very simple. Please fulfill your duty and responsibility as the host of the Sacred Assembly, and send martial saints into the void to search for Ji Tianqing. After all, he is the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Whether he is dead or alive, the Heaven Extinction Divine Kingdom must find him to give the Luoshui Divine Kingdom an explanation. Chapter 2198. Taihao Yunqi's identity was different from an ordinary martial sage. Moreover, what he said was reasonable. Even Yuan Zhan could not refute his words. Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Changtian immediately agreed with him. That's right. What the seventh godson said is exactly what we are thinking. What the seventh godson said is what the host of the Sacred Assembly should do. This should be the responsibility of the Heaven Extinction Holy Nation. This matter has nothing to do with the seventh god's son. What he said is just and reasonable. The martial sages of the various countries fell silent and looked at Yuan Zhan to see how he would respond. Yuan Zhan furrowed his brows, weighing the pros and cons in his mind. Qin Zheng, who was eager to protect his master, quickly asked Taihao Yunqi, it's easy for you to say that. As everyone knows, the void storm is extremely terrifying and martial sages are no match for it. Ji Tianqing has been swallowed by the void storm and has been smashed into pieces. Where can we find his body? Moreover, the void is vast and boundless. Even if we send martial sages, where can we find him? If those martial sages die in the void, won't more people be implicated? Martial sage Qingshan, Chaoying, Chanyu, and the others nodded in agreement. Taihao Yunqi shook his head and said solemnly, Ji Tianqing is not an ordinary martial sage. He may not die in the void storm. Even if he dies, there will be some traces left behind. At least some fragments will be left behind. For example, haven't you been trying to find the whereabouts of the divine sword? The burial of heaven? If the divine sword, the burial of heaven, is in his hands, even if it is in the void, it will not be damaged. Hearing his words, a cold light flashed in Yuan Zhan's eyes and he thought to himself, damn bastard, he has already guessed it? Damn it. In fact, even if Taihao Yunqi did not ask him to send people to search for Ji Tianqing, he would enter the void to find him. That was because he wanted to confirm whether Ji Tianqing was dead or not. He also wanted to find the divine sword, the burial of heaven. That was the reason why he was in a hurry to leave the void stage. However, now that Taihao Yunqi had interfered, things had become even more complicated. Taihao Yunqi saw that Yuan Zhan was silent and continued, as for the problem that Lord Qin mentioned, it is even easier to solve. I have a magic weapon given to me by the Father God, which allows me to travel unimpeded in the void. Why don't I accompany your country's martial sage into the void to search for Ji Tianqing? A cold light flashed across Yuan Zhan's eyes, and he immediately made up his mind. He raised his head to look at Taihao Yunqi and said expressionlessly, Seventh Godchild is right. I should be responsible for the accident that happened to Ji Tianqing during the Sacred Assembly. I should send someone. Oh no, I should personally enter the void to search for him. Regardless of whether he is dead or alive, I will be able to answer to the Luo River God Nation. I don't need to trouble the seventh son of God. I also have a magic treasure that can travel freely in the void. Hearing his words, Qin Zheng frowned. The martial sages of the various countries heaved a sigh of relief and looked relieved. Even Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and the other two looked relieved. Taihao Yunqi nodded slightly and said, "Yes, Your Highness is wise. That is good. The martial sages present are all witnesses to this matter. We will stay as witnesses and wait for the results." The martial sages of the various countries who had just relaxed tensed up again. Many of them frowned and protested. "Seventh Son of God, you are making things difficult for us. Yes, Your Highness is going to search for Ji Tianxing. You can just stay as witnesses. Why do you want us to stay? I have important matters to attend to and I am in a hurry to return to my country. How can I delay here?" Taihao Yunqi looked around and said with a smile, "We will see the results in 1 or 2 days. Since all the martial sages have time to attend the sacred assembly, how can you not even have 2 days? Moreover, Ji Tianxing has always been good at creating miracles. Don't you want to see with your own eyes that he has miraculously survived in the void?" Hearing his words, the voices of the martial sages who objected immediately weakened. Many of them were dissatisfied, but they could not say anything. Therefore everyone stayed on the white light disk and waited quietly. Yuan Zhan cupped his hands towards everyone and said expressionlessly, "Everyone, please wait here. I will bring people into the void to search for Ji Tianxing's whereabouts. Let's set the deadline as 2 days. After 2 days I will come back to report the results to everyone." After that, he led Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor into the white light gate and left the void platform. After the 3 of them left, discussions began to break out on the silent round plate. More than 30 martial sages were whispering to each other. Lu Baishuang calmed down and looked grateful. She bowed to Taihao Yunqi and said, "Baishuang thanks the 7th Son of God for speaking up for us. Holy Emperor Baishuang, you are too polite. Please get up." Taihao Yunqi nodded at her and gestured for her to get up. Zhou held Lu Baishuang's arm and said with a smile, "Holy Emperor Baishuang, you don't have to be so polite. You are Tianqing's friend and so are we. 7th brother and I don't believe that this is an accident, and we don't believe that Tianqing has died. However, our abilities are limited. This is all we can do." Lu Baishuang shook her head and said, "No, you have done very well. Unlike me, I was so anxious that I was at a loss of what to do. Young Master Ji is really lucky to have the 2 of you as his friends." Zhou pursed her lips and thought for a while. Then she said with a smile, "Perhaps it is our luck to be his friend." In the dark and cold void, a blurry golden light was floating in the boundless darkness. It was flickering and fluctuating. Upon closer inspection, one could see that there was a young man covered in blood and with messy hair wrapped in the golden light. His white robe was already in tatters, and there were only a few rags hanging on his waist. His dark golden jade-like body was also covered in cracks. After an unknown period of time, the golden light gradually became brighter, like a ray of sunlight. Swoosh! The young man in the golden light sat up. His body was stiff as he turned his head to observe the situation around him. When he saw that he was surrounded by the cold and dark void, he let out a long breath. A look of relief appeared on his face. "Fortunately, I am still in the void and did not fall into the black hole or the abyss of the void." Then he activated the heaven-mending pearl in his mind and released a gentle white light to quickly repair his body. After a short 2 hours, the cracks and wounds all over his body were miraculously healed. He became spirited again and was full of energy. He muttered to himself, "Luckily, I had the foresight to cultivate the holy sword body in advance. That's why I wasn't killed by the void storm. Yuan Zhan, that bastard is really vicious." Chapter 2199. Ji Tianxing was swallowed by the void first. But before he was sucked into the void, he saw what happened to Yuan Chong. Of course, the void storm was terrifying. Those who were not martial gods could not resist it. But he was lucky. He had prepared for a rainy day and had already cultivated the holy sword body. So, he was only covered in wounds in the void storm and did not lose his life. Yuan Chong was not as lucky as him. He was torn to pieces by the void storm on the spot. Not even his bones were left. The so-called accident was all bullshit. Ji Tianxing never believed in accidents. Before the sacred assembly began, he had guessed that Yuan Zhan would not be content and would plot against him. The moment the void storm appeared, he was very sure that Yuan Zhan had made his move. At this moment, Burial of Heaven's voice sounded in his mind. Yuan Zhan is indeed vicious. Fortunately, you had foresight. Otherwise, you would have died this time. Ji Tianqing smiled and said in a playful tone, I won't die. Even if I didn't cultivate the holy sword body, don't I still have you? Indeed, if he did not cultivate the holy sword body, he would have hidden in the sword of Burial of Heaven when the void storm swallowed him. With the material and grade of the sword of Burial of Heaven, it would not be destroyed by the void storm. Burial of Heaven was silent for a moment and said in a serious tone, Yuan Zhan dared to attack you in front of everyone. It means that he is confident. He is sure that you are Kenshin and the sword of Burial of Heaven is in your hands. So, he did not hesitate to take the risk to kill you and snatch the sword of Burial of Heaven. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a cold smile, if it was just him, he would not have the guts. I'm afraid his father is behind him. Martial God Tianju? Burial of Heaven paused and said in a cold tone, among the three martial gods, only he is ambitious and dares to plot against you. When you return to the immortal state, you must not let him go. No matter what, you must kill him to prevent future troubles. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, of course. Back then, martial god Tianju didn't dare to offend me, so I didn't take it to heart and didn't want to kill him. But it's different now. Since he dared to make a move against me, he's courting death. However, it's still too early to say this. I have to figure out where this is and return to Sky City as soon as possible. Return to Wangtian City? Burial of Heaven was startled. He asked in confusion, that's Yuan Zhan's territory. Why did you go back? Wouldn't that give him another chance to make his move? What's more, he'll definitely treat it as an accident, and you won't be able to confront him. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said with bright eyes, no, that's not the case. Yuan Chang's death and my unexpected disappearance will definitely cause a storm. No matter how much Yuan Zhan tries to cover it up, some people won't let it go just like that. They'll definitely make a big fuss. Who? Burial of Heaven was full of doubts and couldn't understand. Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, that silly woman Lu Baishuang. There's also Taihao Yunqi and Zhujiu. They won't sit idly by. Burial of Heaven thought for a moment and said in a strange tone, I can understand why Taihao Yunqi and Zhujiu would stand up for you. As for that Lu Baishuang, aren't you thinking too much? Ji Tianqing wasn't embarrassed. He shook his head and said, no, you don't understand her. That silly woman is cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Burial of Heaven chuckled and said, well, you're really in love debt. Since that's the case, let's determine the location first and then try to return. Ji Tianqing turned his head and looked at the void behind him. In the distant darkness there was a huge star, shining with golden light. There was no doubt that it was the world he was in before. A playful smile appeared on his face as he shook his head gently and said, don't worry. Maybe someone will come to take us back soon. Burial of Heaven was startled for a moment and asked in confusion, who will take you back? Ji Tianqing looked at the star with a sneer and murmured, look, aren't they already here? As his voice fell, a few white lights lit up in the void in front of him and rushed over as fast as lightning. In just a few dozen breaths, the white lights arrived in front of him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The white lights faded away and three figures appeared. The leader was a young man in a silver robe with a dark golden dragon cloak on his shoulder. It was Yuan Zhan. Behind him were two middle-aged men. One was more than 2 meters tall, burly and muscular, wearing a bright silver armor and a dragon feather 9-star helmet. The other man was of medium build, wearing a sapphire blue robe, and had a square face. There was no doubt that these two were Qingjing and the Sky City Lord. Ji Tianqing's cold eyes swept across the three of them as a sneer appeared on his face. Yuan Zhan, Qingjing, and the other two sized up Ji Tianqing from head to toe. Seeing that he was unscathed, they couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise and disbelief. Ji Tianqing, I didn't guess wrong. You actually survived. The void storm swallowed you, but you're still safe and sound. It's really incredible. Yuan Zhan stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and said in a low voice. Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, what? Seeing that I'm still alive, you must be very disappointed, right? Haha. I've long guessed your thoughts and schemes. How could I not be prepared? Yuan Zhen immediately shook his head and asked, Ji Tianqing, what do you mean by this? When you were fighting with Yuan Chong, an accident happened in the void platform which led to you being swallowed by the void. In the past few hundred years, the power of the void platform has been unstable and accidents often happen. Oh? Accident? Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, Then what do you mean by bringing people here now? Yuan Zhen answered without hesitation, Of course I'm here to search for you and bring you back. Is that so? Ji Tianqing sneered and said indifferently, Yuan Zhen, put away your hypocritical face. This is the boundless void. Other than the four of us, there's no one else. You don't have to act anymore. Just do it directly and save everyone's time. Yuan Zhen pretended to be confused and asked, I'm hypocritical? Why would I do it to you? Do you know that after you were swallowed by the void, Liu Baishuang of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom went crazy and pestered me endlessly? Even Taihao Yunqi and Taihao Zhuzhou didn't hesitate to become enemies with me, and asked me to send people to search for you. I personally entered the void to find you. Of course I have to bring you back to answer to them. No matter how Yuan Zhen explained, Ji Tianqing didn't believe him. Yuan Zhen, everyone is well aware of what you're trying to do. If you don't do it now, you won't have another chance in the future. Yuan Zhen saw that his attitude was firm and didn't waver at all. He couldn't help but frown and his eyes gradually turned cold. Since you're so stubborn, don't blame me for being rude. Anyway, you were swallowed by the void storm and were smashed to pieces. This is something everyone knows. Chapter 2200. Yuan Zhen could no longer keep up the act. He could only tear off his disguise and reveal his true face. His eyes and expression became cold, and his body emitted an undisguised murderous aura. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord took out their weapons and Dharma treasures and spread out. The three of them formed a triangular formation, surrounding Ji Tianqing in the middle. An invisible force field quietly formed, enveloping the void within a radius of 100 miles. Ji Tianqing didn't care at all. He stared at Yuan Zhen with a cold smile and said, That's right. Why waste time pretending? Yuan Zhen raised his eyebrows and said coldly, Ji Tianqing, now that you're in the void, no one can save you. I really don't know where your confidence comes from. You're about to die, yet you're still so arrogant? Ji Tianqing was stunned and asked, Where did my confidence come from? Don't you know it? Yuan Zhen sneered. Haha. Is your confidence because your Kenshin's reincarnation? Or is it because of the sword of burial of heaven in your hand? You can't be so naive as to think that we'll be afraid of you just because you're Kenshin's reincarnation, right? With your strength, even if you can defeat Yuan Chong, you're definitely not our match. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and nodded. That's right. The three of you are stronger than Yuan Chong. If you join forces to attack me, it looks like I have no chance of winning. Yuan Zhen corrected him coldly. It's not that you have no chance of winning, but that you have no way of surviving. Since you know your own strength, then things are easy. I'll give you a chance to live. If you know what's good for you, then obediently hand over the sword of burial of heaven. He added, Don't play tricks. Don't think that I'm that idiot Chu Yun Saint Emperor. A fake sword of burial of heaven can't fool me. Hearing his words, Ji Tianqing immediately understood what was going on. Before Chu Yun Divine Emperor was killed, Yuan Zhen had already investigated him. Ji Tianqing sneered. His right hand emitted a black light as he held the burial of heaven sword in his hand. He said coldly, The burial of heaven sword is here. Come and take it if you have the ability. Yuan Zhen's body shook when he suddenly saw the pitch-black and simple heaven burial sword. He stared at the heaven burial sword and observed it carefully, although he was very sure that the sword of burial of heaven was in Ji Tianqing's hands. But before this, he had never seen it with his own eyes. Now that he saw the sword of burial of heaven, he was completely relieved and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha ha ha, I didn't guess wrong. The sword of burial of heaven is really in your hands. All of my efforts were not in vain. Yuan Chong's sacrifice was worth it. At this moment, he didn't have to pretend and endure any longer, and he'd completely revealed his true colors. The sword of burial of heaven is mine. Your life is also mine. Yuan Zhan took out an ancient halberd that was more than 10 feet long and shouted with murderous intent, "Kill!" At the same time, he held the ancient golden halberd with both hands. In an instant, dozens of dark golden flowing lights were shot out toward Ji Tianqing. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor also attacked at the same time. They used their secret techniques and slashed out dozens of sword lights. Suddenly, colorful magical power brilliance lit up the void for hundreds of miles. Violent dermic power fluctuations filled the entire area, suppressing Ji Tianqing fiercely. Facing the siege of 3 powerhouses, Ji Tianqing was fearless. He said proudly, "Finally, I don't have to hide my strength anymore. I can go all out." Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. Ji Tianqing shouted in a low voice. Golden light burst out from his body, and he exuded an unparalleled domineering aura. In the next moment, his body expanded violently and turned into a golden giant with a height of 10 feet. His aura and combat strength also increased by 6 times in an instant, reaching an extremely terrifying level. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Facing the sword lights and sword shadows that came down from the sky, he held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed out a huge sword light. The giant golden sword, which was thousands of feet long, slashed the golden light and sword shadows with the power to destroy everything. Bang! 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 A deafening sound burst out and resounded through the void. Yuan Zhan's dark golden flowing lights and Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor's sword lights were shattered on the spot. The giant sword's power didn't decrease at all, and continued to slash toward Yuan Zhan. The terrifying sword intent shrouded Yuan Zhan, causing his expression to change drastically. His eyes were filled with horror. He looked up at the giant sword that came down from the sky and couldn't help but roar. He used this sword technique on the void platform before, but it was definitely not this powerful. The same technique, but now the power has increased by several times? How is this possible? How can he hide it so well? Only now did Yuan Zhan realize that Ji Tianqing didn't use his full strength at all when he fought on the void platform. Right now, he was truly using his full strength. No, Ji Tianqing was so cunning. He probably hadn't used his full strength now. Only he himself knew his true strength and his limits the best. Thinking of this, Yuan Zhan actually felt a trace of panic in his heart. But he immediately calmed down. He held the ancient halberd with both hands and raised it above his head, emitting a golden light that shot into the sky. Battle dragon across the sky. Along with his angry roar, the ancient halberd began to emit a golden light that transformed into a mountain-like dragon that blocked the void. Kaboom! Amidst a deafening boom, the gigantic sword struck the golden dragon shadow, sending out golden light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. The giant sword and the dragon shadow shattered at the same time, turning into billions of golden light fragments that scattered in the void. An incomparably powerful impact force blasted Yuan Zhan flying backward for more than a dozen miles, his complexion becoming deathly pale. His, Qin Zheng, and the Wangtian city lord's joint attack formation was immediately broken. Ji Tianqing was about to chase after Yuan Zhan and take advantage of the situation to attack him. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord saw that the situation was not good. They rushed over without thinking about their own safety and stood in front of Ji Tianqing. Sky-flipping seal. The Wangtian city lord formed a seal with both hands and released a vast amount of spiritual power. It condensed into an ancient seal character that was as big as a mountain and pressed down on Ji Tianqing. Qin Zheng also waved his sword and stabbed out hundreds of cold light beams, forming the Big Dipper sword formation and enveloping Ji Tianqing. "How dare you stop me with such a petty trick?" Ji Tianqing shouted angrily. He clenched his left hand into a fist and punched out a huge fist shadow that blasted toward the sky-flipping seal. Star-shattering fist. The starry fist hit the ancient seal character hard. With a dull bang, the two broke at the same time. Ji Tianqing then waved the burial of heaven sword and slashed out 49 starry sword lights. They formed a mysterious formation and stabbed at Qin Zheng's Big Dipper sword formation. Pung 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 pung. Muffled sounds exploded one after another, and the sword lights that filled the sky suddenly collapsed and exploded. In the blink of an eye, The attacks of Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord were all broken by Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing then waved his palm and hit out a dragon claw that blotted out the sky and the sun. Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord were sent flying. With no more obstacles in front of him, his figure flashed and teleported 30 miles, rushing to the front of Yuanzhan. God-slaying sword. Chapter 2201. Yuanzhan had just stabilized himself and was adjusting his spiritual power. He had thought that Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord could stop Ji Tianqing. At the very least, they could stall Ji Tianqing for a few breaths. Only then would he have time to catch his breath and come up with a countermeasure. But he had not expected that Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord could not stop Ji Tianqing and were sent flying in 2 moves. Seeing the giant sword coming at him, Yuanzhan's expression turned extremely serious. His eyes burned with an unyielding will to fight. Heaven battling dragon soul. He roared at the top of his lungs. Holding the halberd with both hands, he stabbed at the sword radiance with all his might. At this moment, he used all his strength to release a vast amount of spiritual power, and infused it into the halberd. The halberd expanded to 10 feet long and shone with a sacred and ancient light. It stabbed out a giant shadow of a double-headed dragon. The double-headed dragon shadow was 10,000 meters long. It was dark gold and covered in hideous scars. It exuded a majestic and murderous aura. The dragon shadow bared its fangs and brandished its claws. In the most ferocious and overbearing manner, it hit the giant sword head-on. Kaboom! Amidst a thunderous boom, the 2-headed dragon shadow was split into 2 by the giant sword and exploded into fragments that filled the sky. Of course, the giant sword's power was also weakened by more than 50%. Bang! The giant sword landed squarely on Yuanzhan and sent him flying away once again, rolling and falling into the void tens of miles away. He was still tumbling in the void. Dark red blood was spurting out of his mouth, nose and orifices. Between his forehead and chest, there was a long and thin crack, from which blood was constantly seeping out. He lowered his head to look at his chest and saw that under the blood-stained silver robe, the dark golden soft armor had already cracked open. The holy void armor, an upper-grade sacred artifact, could not stop his sword. As expected of the sword of burial of heaven, its power is terrifying. Yuanzhan murmured to himself. His voice was filled with shock. Fortunately, he was wearing the holy void armor. That was why he was only injured and survived. If he didn't have this soft armor, he would have been cut in half by that sword and his body would have collapsed on the spot. Thinking of this, a trace of fear gushed out from the bottom of Yuanzhan's heart. But what followed was an even more resolute killing intent and hatred. He has reincarnated and has just broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago. Yet he already possesses such terrifying strength. If we don't get rid of him, when he returns to God realm, I'm afraid even Father God won't be his opponent. Understanding this, Yuanzhan became even more wary of Ji Tianqing. At the same time, Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord pounced on Ji Tianqing, attacking him from both sides. Both of them disregarded their own safety and used their ultimate moves, hoping to delay Ji Tianqing's footsteps and buy time for Yuanzhan to recuperate. Zidian Wild Thunder. Shadowless Fatal Blow. The Wangtian city lord formed a seal with both hands and struck out 9 ancient seal characters. 9 purple thunderbolts were released and blasted towards Ji Tianqing. Qin Zheng's body turned into an illusory black shadow and flashed around Ji Tianqing. At the same time, 7 shadows appeared and stabbed out hundreds of cold light, attacking Ji Tianqing's vital points. Ji Tianqing calmly responded. His left hand struck out the heavenly dragon palm and slapped towards the Wangtian city lord. The 9 bolts of purple lightning struck him, but they were swallowed and dissolved by him. They did not cause any harm to him. On the other hand, the Wangtian city lord was hit by the heavenly dragon palm. He spat out blood and let out a painful scream. Ji Tianqing waved his sword and slashed out a crescent-shaped star sword. It swept around him and smashed all 7 of Qin Zheng's shadows. Although a few cold light blades pierced him, they were all shattered and did not leave a mark on his body. He was in the state of the heavenly dragon tyrant body. His defense was so strong that it made people speechless. Qin Zheng's unique skill was broken, But he did not retreat. He once again used another unique skill and attacked Ji Tianqing. The Wangtian city lord also flew back and rushed towards Ji Tianqing without fear of death. He launched a desperate attack. The two sides fought fiercely in the void, releasing dazzling magic light shadows and constantly colliding with terrifying shock waves. The three figures kept teleporting. Their speed was too fast for the naked eye to follow. It was impossible for the naked eye to capture their movements. In just 10 breaths of time, the three of them had exchanged more than 50 moves. Ji Tianqing had only used 30% of his spiritual power, and was slightly injured. His white robe was a little tattered. However, Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city lord's injuries were too horrible to look at. They were in an extremely sorry state. Both of them were in ragged clothes and covered in blood. There were at least a dozen hideous wounds on their bodies, especially Qin Zheng. His entire left leg was cut off and blood had already soaked the hem of his robe. Although both of them had paid a heavy price and their strength had been greatly weakened. However, they succeeded in stalling for time and bought time for Yuan Zhan to catch his breath. Yuan Zhan had finally suppressed his injuries. He regained his vigor and rushed over with a murderous aura. However, at this moment, Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a sharp cold light. He brazenly used his unique skill, Burial of Heaven. He held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and exploded with an extremely violent spiritual power. He used all his strength to slash out a mysterious pitch-black giant sword. Bam! In the dull loud sound, the pitch-black giant sword slashed Qin Zheng. This time, Qin Zheng was not lucky enough to escape. He was split in half by the giant sword. He was split from head to toe and a large amount of blood splattered out. The incomparably sharp sword Qi minced the two halves of his body into minced meat and blood rain, scattering in the void. Not only was his body destroyed, but his bones were also destroyed. Even the divine soul in his mind did not manage to escape in time, and was split into two halves. Qin Zheng, a level 7 martial sage, the dignified commander of the divine guards, died under the sword of Burial of Heaven and fell in the void. This sudden scene stunned Yuan Zhan and the sky-gazing city lord. Both of them were horrified. They widened their eyes in disbelief and cried out in grief and anger. Lord Qin! Ji Tianqing! You bastard, you killed Qin Zheng! After shouting angrily, Yuan Zhan and the Sky City Master regained their senses and rushed towards Ji Tianqing even more furiously. Ji Tianqing glanced coldly at the two and sneered. If you want to kill me, you should be prepared to be killed by me. As he spoke, he waved his palm and shot out a colorful lightning beam towards the Sky City Master. The Sky City Master had just rushed over, and was about to perform a secret seal when he was hit by the 5-colored lightning. Kaboom! The sound of thunder exploded and shook the void for hundreds of miles. The dazzling 5-colored lightning instantly engulfed the Sky City Master. His robes, his soft armor, and his long hair were all reduced to ashes by the lightning. Even his body was turned into charcoal by the 5-colored lightning and countless black ashes splattered out. He flew out in a sorry state and fell into the void 10 miles away. Yuan Zhen looked at him and found that he had been twisted into a ball, like a piece of charcoal, with black smoke billowing out. Chapter 2202. Yuan Zhan was a little dazed, his mind almost blank. He led Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord into the void in a threatening manner. Originally, he thought that victory was in his hands, and that he would definitely be able to kill Ji Tianqing and obtain the Burial of Heaven sword. But now, Qin Zheng was killed, and the Sky City Lord was also crippled. Even he himself had suffered serious injuries. And yet, Ji Tianqing was unscathed, still looking calm and composed. This ending was the complete opposite of what he had expected. He could not believe it. Even if you're the reincarnation of Kenshin, you shouldn't be this strong. Even the Kenshin of the past couldn't be this sick. Why? I was so wise and my plan was flawless, but in the end it turned out like this? Why is this? Yuan Zheng glared at Ji Tianqing, gritting his teeth and growling in a low voice. Ji Tianqing ignored him, raised his left hand again, and punched at the Sky City Lord who had turned into charcoal. Bam! The black charcoal shattered on the spot, crumbling into pieces and scattering in the void. This time, the Sky City Lord's body was also destroyed, and his soul was destroyed. In the void, only Ji Tianqing and Yuan Zhan were left. Ji Tianqing looked at him expressionlessly, and said indifferently, "Your two lackeys are dead, now it's your turn." Yuan Zhan's body stiffened, and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. But he was unyielding and said firmly, "No matter how strong you are, you will die today." As he said that, he slowly stretched out his left hand, and a dense golden light lit up in his palm. A dark golden talisman appeared, floating in front of him. This half-foot-long talisman was engraved with mysterious patterns, exuding a mysterious and powerful aura. Yuan Zhan's face was serious as he pinched his fingertip, forcing out a drop of dark red blood, and dripped it on the talisman. The talisman shone brightly, burning into a wisp of golden flame, and burrowing into his body. Suddenly Yuan Zhan's body began to swell and distort, the lines of his muscles bulging, and his bones elongated, making crisp cracking sounds. His aura was surging wildly, and his strength was rising steadily. In a short span of 2 breaths, he had transformed into a 30-foot-tall giant that resembled an iron tower. His strength had also skyrocketed by 6 times, reaching the peak of the 9th level of the Martial Saint Realm. Nearing the limits of the Martial Saint Realm, the injuries that he had suffered earlier had also disappeared, and they could no longer affect him in the slightest. He became majestic again and shouted with a strong fighting spirit, "This God Annihilation Curse is a life-saving trump card given to me by Father God. It can help me break through my limits. For more than 300 years no one has ever been able to force me to this point. Ji Tianqing, you are very strong, but I will still kill you." As he spoke, he waved his left palm and unleashed an overwhelming golden light that swept towards Ji Tianqing. He brandished the ancient halberd with his right hand, and 2 golden dragon phantoms shot out towards Ji Tianqing. Dragon extermination. At this moment, a resplendent golden light illuminated the void within a radius of 300 miles. The 2 mountain-sized golden dragon phantoms also released a power that could destroy everything, enveloping Ji Tianqing. Looking at the golden light descending from the sky and the 2 golden dragon phantoms that were attacking him from the left and right, Ji Tianqing said calmly, "It looks like this is your final trump card, your strongest move. Although it is very strong, it is a pity that you will still have to die." Saying thus, he gripped the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands, a focused expression on his face as he slashed out with all his might. First sword cleaving heavens. At this moment his magic power and essence, chi and spirit merged into one, condensing a supreme sword intent as he executed this sword of utmost sincerity. Yuan Zhan could clearly feel that as Ji Tianqing executed this sword, his entire person had become divine and ethereal. It was as if he had ascended to the unparalleled realm of divinity. Yuan Zhan was shocked and terrified, unable to comprehend exactly what kind of wondrous sword art could actually cause such a transformation. Kaboom! There was an earth-shattering explosion as the sword of heaven cleaving heavens shattered the 2 golden dragon phantoms, splitting the sky-covering golden light in half. Yuan Zhan couldn't dodge in time and was struck by the sword head-on. Bang! With a muffled sound, blood splattered everywhere as he was sent flying while vomiting blood. His silver robe and golden soft armor also shattered into countless pieces, scattering in the void. Before Yuan Zhan fell into the void, Ji Tianqing swung the sword of Burial of Heaven again and stabbed at him from afar. Stab sword! A speck of cold light flashed in the void. In the next moment, the cold light hit Yuan Zhan and exploded in his chest. Boom! A giant silver mushroom cloud rose into the sky, illuminating the void with a blazing white light. A washbasin-sized hole appeared in Yuan Zhan's chest. His bones and organs were clearly visible. Dark red blood gushed out like a small stream and sprinkled in the void. His body was severely injured and almost destroyed on the spot. His strength was also weakened to the extreme. Ah! The unparalleled pain made him scream uncontrollably. His voice was especially shrill. Ji Tianqing teleported 25 miles without any expression and caught up with him in an instant. He slashed at him again with his sword. "It's time to end this." He let out an indifferent roar and slashed out a dazzling starry sword. The great star sword was about to hit Yuan Zhan and destroy his body and soul on the spot, killing him on the spot. But right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. 100 miles behind Yuan Zhan, in the empty void, a sacred golden light suddenly lit up. It was a giant golden palm the size of a mountain. It had 6 fingers and each finger was the same length. The giant golden palm tore through the void and blocked in front of Yuan Zhan, slamming into the starry sword with a bang. Bam bam! The starry sword was shattered on the spot, but the golden palm was unscathed and shone even brighter. Yuan Zhan, who had narrowly escaped death, was lucky to survive. He fell into the void and didn't have time to check his injuries. He looked at the giant palm in shock. After clearly seeing the appearance of the giant golden palm, he immediately let out a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. His tense mind also relaxed. Ji Tianqing also stopped chasing and frowned as he stared at the golden palm. 6 fingers? And the same length? He raised his eyebrows and sneered. He said to Yuan Zhan in a disdainful tone, "No wonder you dared to attack me and tried to kill me in the void. Just as I expected, it turns out that you have the greatest backing." Yuan Zhan raised his palms and channeled his magic power. He used a ball of green light to cover his chest and abdomen. He smiled coldly as he suppressed his injuries. "Ha ha ha. Ji Tianqing, it seems that I can't hide anything from you. If that's the case, you should know that you can't escape today. No matter what, you can't go back alive." Ji Tianqing stood in the void, holding the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. He pointed at the void below his feet and stared at the golden palm. He said in a playful tone, "So what if he attacked?" Chapter 2203. Ji Tianqing had guessed that martial god Tianju was behind Yuan Zhan when he first landed in the empty space. Therefore, when the 6-fingered palm appeared, he was sure that martial god Tianju had made a move. Only martial god Tianju could send a giant palm across the empty space to block Sumo's sword skill. This was something that a martial sage could not do. Ji Tianqing had just broken through to the martial sage realm and could not fight against a martial god. However, he knew that martial god Tianju was still in the Holy Kingdom and could not come to kill him personally. A giant palm across the empty space could only save Yuan Zhan but could not threaten him. Yuan Zhan also understood this point. His expression froze and fear flashed across his eyes. However, he refused to show his fear and sneered confidently, "Ji Tianqing, your arrogance has broken through the sky. After all, you are just a martial sage. Even if you can kill Qin Zheng and the Wangtian city governor, you can't fight against a martial god. Even a martial god realm expert could crush you to death with a single finger. There is only a one-word difference between a martial sage and a martial god. However, you should know the difference in strength better than anyone else." Ji Tianqing knew the difference in strength between the two realms. However, he knew that Yuan Zhan was just putting on a brave front. "Since you treat your father like a god, I'd like to see if your father can save your life." As soon as he finished speaking, Ji Tianqing swung the Heaven Barrier sword and slashed at Yuan Zhan. White Tiger Sacred Sword. 1,000-meter-long silver-white sword light slashed down from the sky toward Yuan Zhan, along with the silhouette of a white tiger as large as a mountain. Before the sword radiance arrived, the terrifying sword essence and killing intent had already enveloped him. Yuan Zhan's expression changed and fear flashed across his eyes. He was severely injured and had no strength to fight back. As long as he was hit by the White Tiger Sacred Sword, he would definitely die. At this critical moment, he could only place all his hopes on the giant golden palm. Swoosh! The giant golden palm did not disappoint him. It immediately lit up with a bright golden light and slapped the White Tiger Sacred Sword. Kaboom! The giant palm and the sword radiance collided, and there was a deafening explosion. Golden and silver light shards flew everywhere. The shadow of the white tiger was destroyed and the 1,000-foot-long starry sword radiance shattered into countless pieces. Of course, the giant golden palm was also cut off by 30%. 2 fingers were cut off and the light became dimmer. A violent shockwave spread out and swept Yuan Zhan flew into the empty space far away. He spat out a mouthful of blood from the impact of the shockwave. His consciousness was blurred and his injuries worsened. He finally regained consciousness after he was sent hundreds of miles away. He turned his head to look at the void and saw that the giant golden palm was damaged, but it was still blocking Ji Tianqing's attack. The two of them were locked in a fierce battle. Seeing this, Yuan Zhen immediately made up his mind. Run! The giant golden Ju Tianju's Juju. Ju Tianju's Juju could not Ju's right its. Ju Tianju's Yuan Zhen endured his injuries and took out a palm-sized black boat. He formed a seal with both hands and channeled a vast amount of spiritual energy into the boat. Instantly, the small boat expanded by 1,000 times, turning into a pitch-black flying boat that was 100 meters long. The boat was a special sacred weapon. It was used for traveling and could travel unimpeded in the empty space at an extremely fast speed. Without hesitation, Yuan Zhen got into the flying boat and drove it back, fleeing as fast as a bolt of lightning. In the empty space not far away, Ji Tianqing was still entangled with the giant golden palm. Seeing Yuan Zhen escape, his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He wanted to chase after Yuan Zhen and kill him on the spot. However, the giant golden palm stopped him with all its might. Even if the sword radiance cracked it, it would not back down. After all, the giant palm was just a divine skill cast by martial god Tianjue. It was formed by divine power and had no life or consciousness. Even if it collapsed, it would not cause any harm to martial god Tianjue. Green Dragon's Sacred Sword. Sky-breaking sword. Ji Tianqing kept roaring as he used one divine skill after another to attack the giant golden palm with all his might. After a dozen breaths, the giant golden palm finally could not hold on any longer. Crack crack. With a series of crisp cracking sounds, the giant golden palm collapsed and turned into billions of golden fragments that scattered in the empty space. In the end, as Ji Tianqing had mentioned, even martial god Tianjue could not do anything to Qin Nan with his giant palm. Only martial god Tianjue could kill him. After the giant golden palm was destroyed, the empty space returned to its calm and dark state. Ji Tianqing flew away without hesitation toward the star shrouded in golden light. I have fallen out with Yuan Zhen and even martial god Tianjue has attacked. From now on, I will be at odds with Tianjue Divine Nation. I can't let Yuan Zhen escape. I can't let him go back alive. Ji Tianqing murmured to himself. His face was cold and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He flew toward the world of 5 elements as he searched for Yuan Zhen. However, Yuan Zhen had already escaped far away. Moreover, he used the black flying ship as a cover and did not leave any traces. Ji Tianqing searched for 100 breaths but still could not find Yuan Zhen. Just as Ji Tianqing sped up, the dark empty space in front of him suddenly rippled. Swoosh! A gap was torn open in the empty space and a dazzling golden light shone. The sudden golden light passed through the gap and landed in the empty space in front of Ji Tianqing. After the golden light faded, a tall middle-aged man in a golden robe appeared in front of Ji Tianqing. The tall and burly middle-aged man was covered in a layer of faint golden light and exuded a sacred and domineering aura. His face was cold and dignified. The contours of his face were as sharp as a knife. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a sharp and threatening cold light. The dark golden robe he wore was embroidered with the pattern of 2 dragons and a phoenix. The collar and sleeves were embroidered with stars and clouds. He wore a dark golden crown that was more than a foot tall on his head. It was inlaid with 9 gems of different colors, all exuding a mysterious and vast aura. Most importantly, both of his hands under his wide sleeves had 6 fingers. Seeing the sudden appearance of the golden-robed man, Ji Tianqing immediately stopped in the empty space. His face became solemn. His pupils constricted as he frowned and sized up the golden-robed man. A strange look flashed in his eyes. Tianju. It's him? He actually came to the empty space to kill me. This thought flashed in Ji Tianqing's mind. He immediately tensed up and his eyes were filled with hostility and vigilance. However, after careful observation, he realized that the figure in front of him was not the real body of martial god Tianju. It was a doppelganger of his divine soul. This result made Ji Tianqing secretly heave a sigh of relief. It was good that it was not the real body. Then he still had a chance of survival. At this time, Tianju's doppelganger looked at him with burning eyes and a cold smile appeared on his face. Chapter 2204. The tone of Tianju's avatar was a little strange. At first glance it sounded like an old friend who had not seen each other for many years and was exchanging pleasantries. There was excitement and disbelief, as well as some emotion. However, Ji Tianqing could feel that Tianju's avatar's tone was condescending and gloating. After all, when he was Kenshin, he had shocked the world and suppressed the three great martial gods. Even if martial god Tianju did not accept him, he would not dare to offend him. Now more than 1,000 years had passed. Kenshin, who was once incomparably glorious, had experienced death and rebirth, becoming a young man who had just broken through to the martial sage realm. Tianju was still a high and mighty martial god, one of the most powerful overlords of the five elements world. One could imagine how Tianju was feeling at the moment. Ji Tianqing was well aware of it, but he did not show it on his face. He was still calm and indifferent. He looked at Tianju's avatar and said calmly, "Since you have seen through my identity, there is nothing to say between us. You controlled your avatar to stop me. If you want to catch up with me or mock me, you don't have to do that. You are not my friend, and you are not worthy of catching up with me. You once bowed and bent your knees in front of me, and I have also reached the top of the world. You are not qualified to mock me." Tianju's avatar immediately narrowed his eyes, and the sneer on his face deepened. He looked at Ji Tianqing mockingly and nodded. Not bad, Kenshin is indeed Kenshin. He was still as condescending and arrogant as he was in the past. Yes, back then you were the best in the world and I was just a martial god. How could I be qualified to be your friend? Moreover, you have ascended to the upper world and ruled over the 10,000 gods. I am just a small martial god, and I am no different from an ant in your eyes. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, "It's good that you understand." Ha ha ha. Martial god Tianju raised his head and laughed, and his tone was indescribably proud and contemptuous. But don't forget, no matter how glorious and noble you were, it is all in the past. You're only a martial saint now. You can't even be considered an ant. The person that this god once looked up to and revered is now right in front of me. This god can crush him with a single finger. Tell me, isn't this laughable? Wasn't it ironic? Ha ha. Martial god Tianju clasped his hands behind his back and paced back and forth in the void, laughing crazily. Ji Tianqing was expressionless as he looked at him indifferently. He asked, "Back then I was ranked at the top of the five elements world and my might shook the world. However, I didn't stay in this world for long before I ascended and left. Even if I didn't give you any pointers back then, I didn't suppress you, nor did I have any enmity with you. I don't understand. Why do you hate me so much to the point of annihilating me, and not even sparing the orthodoxies under my sect?" Martial god Tianju continued to circle around Qin Nan. He paced in the air and said in a deep voice, "If you had really fallen in the past, you would have only left your reputation and glorious achievements. Even if I refuse to accept you, I will still revere you from the bottom of my heart. But not only did you ascend alone, after you fell in the upper realm, you were reborn. Do you know how hateful it is? Do you know how envious it is? For tens of thousands of years, all the martial gods were trapped in the five elements world. They couldn't escape the 10,000 years limit and could only turn into dried bones and yellow sand. You were the only one who successfully ascended to the upper realm, peeked into the true divine Tao, and became the supreme divine king. This is hateful enough to drive me crazy with jealousy." Ji Tianqing already knew this. He nodded slightly and said, "You didn't want to die. You didn't want to be trapped in the five elements world like the previous martial gods and die in the 10,000 years limit. You were ambitious. You only wanted to leave the five elements world and ascend to the upper realm. You also wanted to step into the true divine path and become the divine king who could command the galaxy and rule over 10,000 gods. Therefore, you secretly attacked my disciples and destroyed the piece of the pillar of heaven's mountains just to find the mystery of my ascension." Martial god Tianju nodded without hesitation and said coldly, "That's right. You clearly knew the method of ascension, but you were selfish and didn't want to share it. This is the original sin." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a trace of contempt. Martial god Tianju's face was filled with resentment. He continued later, "You finally fell. After the news spread, I was also extremely shocked. I even felt pity and sorrow. Because I know that after you die, the method of ascension that you mastered is likely to be lost. It was also because of this reason that I didn't have much hope. When I sent people to search for the mystery of ascension, I didn't destroy the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. If it wasn't for my mercy, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains would have been destroyed. Ji Tianqing shook his head and sneered. No, you didn't destroy the Pillar of Heaven's mountains not because of your mercy. It was because you still had hope and a trace of fantasy. You always thought that I would leave the mystery of ascension behind and pass it to my disciples or hide it in the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Once you destroyed the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, your hope would be completely destroyed. Marshal Ga Tianju was startled. He glanced at him sharply and sneered. I really can't hide anything from you. I didn't expect you to be the one who understands me the most. Ji Tianqing showed a disdainful expression and said coldly, How can your ugliness and despicableness escape my eyes? Marshal Ga Tianju was not angry. He sneered and asked, Do you know the real reason why I have to kill you even though I have no enmity with you? Ji Tianqing said indifferently, Because although I fell, I didn't truly disappear. I was reborn and rose up in an even more monstrous manner. You were mad with jealousy and hatred. You spent your entire life and couldn't even ascend to the upper realm, let alone understand the mystery of life and death and reincarnate. But I had everything, as if I was the luckiest person in the world. You were jealous, angry, and unwilling to accept this. Therefore, you wouldn't let me rise up again and you wouldn't sit and watch me return to the peak. You wanted to kill me and take away everything that belonged to me. Not only the way to ascend to the upper realm, but also the mystery of reincarnation. Marshal Ga Tianju heard this and laughed wildly again. Ha ha ha. The one who understands me is Kenshin. That's right. You're absolutely right. The heavens are unfair and cut off my path to ascension. I have to go against the heavens and seize a chance to live. No matter how strong you are, Kenshin, you're just a lucky person under the heavens. Only I, Yuan Tianjue, am the most talented and bold overlord. His deep and vigorous voice reverberated in the void. It was deafening and domineering. However, after Ji Tianqing heard his words, he shook his head and laughed out loud with a heart full of pity. Ha 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 ha, actually you're not a talented and bold overlord. You're just a narrow-minded and selfish fool. You think your heart is higher than the heavens, but in my eyes, you're just a frog at the bottom of a well. A pitiful worm who feels sorry for himself. Chapter 2205. What did you say? Tianju's clone's expression suddenly changed. He stopped sneering and glared at Ji Tianqing angrily. His whole body was wrapped in a layer of raging anger. His eyes were gloomy as ice, and his tone was angry and low. Ji Tianqing was not afraid at all. Instead, he looked at him with even more contempt, and said in a sonorous voice, The heavenly Tao is incomplete, but the divine Tao is infinite. You are trapped in a low-level world, and you are only fighting for fame and fortune your whole life. At most, you can only seek the path of ascension. You complain that the heavenly Tao is unfair, but you don't even understand what the heavenly Tao is. You are just a frog in a well, but you boast that you have the ambition to devour the heavens. Isn't that ridiculous? I once reached the peak of the divine Tao and ruled over thousands of gods. In the morning I went to the origin star sea and in the evening I went to the burial star river. When I was in the mood, I sang with the sun star and raised my cup with the moon star. When I was moved by emotions, I plucked the 18 stars of the heavenly dipper to make a pearl chain and the 36 stars of the earthly fiend to carve a pendant. The heavenly Tao is supreme, the universe is vast, and the mystery of the divine Tao. How can you imagine all of this? Speaking of the past, Ji Tianqing's clothes fluttered in the wind, and he was in high spirits. His whole body exuded a transcendent aura of a ruler looking down on all living things. Even Tianju's clone was moved. He looked at him quietly, and the corresponding scene in his mind was filled with yearning and longing. However, Ji Tianqing's tone became more and more bleak as he spoke. He finally waved his hand and chuckled self-deprecatingly. Haha, what's the use of telling you this? Isn't it like talking to a summer bug? Although he was mocking himself, his eyes were full of pity when he looked at Tianju's clone. That was from the heart and soul. just like a god looking down on mortals and ants. Between the two, from vision, knowledge, life, and soul, they belong to different levels. Tianju's clone suddenly flew into a rage. He only felt that he had received the greatest and most unforgivable insult in his life. Ji Tianxing. You lowly idiot, you bastard. The current you is the lowliest ant in front of this god. This god is the high and mighty martial god. And you are just a piece of meat on the chopping block, a reptile that this god can crush at will. Ji Tianxing saw that he was about to go crazy, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a cold smile. Haha, is that so? I poked at your sore spot, no wonder you flew into a rage. His tone was very calm, as if nothing had happened. However, the more martial god Tianju acted like this, the more furious he became. He cursed with a ferocious face, bastard. No matter how eloquent you are, you will still die today. No matter how glorious you were in the past, you can't change the fact that you're going to die. Didn't you think that you were superior and aloof from worldly affairs? After I kill you, I'll take away your memories, the method of ascension, and the mystery of reincarnation. At that time, this god will also be able to ascend to the higher realms, ascend to the peak of the divine Tao, and become a divine king worshipped by all gods. No, this god will definitely be more outstanding than you. I will be able to compete with the heavenly Tao, and hold the billions of stars in my hands. Martial god Tianju's long hair fluttered as he roared loudly. Having said that, he suddenly stretched out his palms and struck out a dazzling golden light toward Ji Tianxing's head. Everything will belong to me. You can die now. The dazzling golden light that covered the sky suddenly formed hundreds of golden light swords. Terrifying divine power burst out and shrouded Ji Tianxing's body. Ji Tianxing looked up at the sky calmly. His left hand formed a sword art, while his right hand waved the burial of heaven sword. He used all his strength to defend himself. Even though he had the memories and knowledge of a divine king, he had regarded martial god Tianju as a frog in a well and a lowly ant. However, he was only a martial sage now. If he could not defend himself against the attack of Tianju's avatar, he would definitely die today. Ancestral swords. Ji Tianxing's face was cold as he shouted. He waved the burial of heaven sword and pierced out starlight, forming a huge mysterious seal. Suddenly, tens of thousands of starry giant swords condensed in the void in all directions. Swish! Swish! Countless starry swords flew over and danced around him, forming a huge sword array. The circular sword formation was like a ball of light, tightly protecting Ji Tianxing. Bang 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 bang. Over 100 golden swords slashed down, ruthlessly slashing at the starlight sword array, causing a series of loud noises to erupt. The terrifying sound waves spread out in the void, causing ripples to form in the surrounding thousands of miles. The giant golden swords were all shattered, turning into golden light spots that filled the sky and dissipated in the void. The sword formation formed by tens of thousands of starry swords was also shattered, turning into billions of starlight and dissipating. Pfff, Ji Tianxing spat out a mouthful of blood. Clutching the sword of burial of heaven with both hands, he was sent flying backwards. After flying for over 100 miles, he finally came to a stop. His entire body flickered with a golden light that flickered unsteadily. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and his back was hunched as he panted violently. His long hair hung down loosely, covering his pale face. There was a burning pain in his 5 viscera and 6 bowels. His bones and meridians were stiff as if they were frozen, and he could not exert any strength. He slowly raised his head and stared coldly at Tianju's clone. He muttered to himself, even though my myriad star sword array is a divine path unique skill, 10 times more exquisite than martial god Tianju's divine skill, with his strength and knowledge, it is impossible for him to comprehend it. After all, I am only a martial saint and he is a martial god. Even if I used the holy sword body, I could not withstand a divine skill from him, and was severely injured on the spot. Hateful, ridiculous. At this time, Ji Tianxing was in a difficult situation, and he was full of helplessness. It was like a master of extraordinary swordsmanship, who had lost all his power and became a cripple. He could not even defeat a soldier who had a rudimentary understanding of martial arts. This was the so-called one man can defeat 10 men. It was both sad and lamentable. In the void 100 miles away, Tianju's clone stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and sneered, "Kenshin, how do you feel now? This god can end your life with one more move. Even if you have great skills and vast knowledge and experience, you can't even keep your life now. You were boasting shamelessly just now. Isn't it ridiculous?" Ji Tianqing's expression was the same as before, still full of contempt and pity. An ant will always be an ant. Even if you are a martial god, you are just a slightly stronger ant. Besides, I have to say something. 1,500 years have passed, but you have not made much progress. Have you lived for such a long time in vain? You are courting death. Tianju's clone was enraged again. He raised his palms and slapped across the void. 2 mountain-sized golden palms, carrying a divine power that could destroy heaven and earth, slapped toward Ji Tianqing. These 2 golden palms were 10 times more powerful than the one that Ji Tianqing had shattered previously. Ji Tianqing was immediately in a desperate situation and was about to lose his life. At this critical moment, he raised his left palm with a determined expression and released a sacred golden flame. God-slaying spear. Chapter 2206. Boom! The god-slaying spear hit one of the giant golden palms, creating an earth-shattering explosion. The void within thousands of miles shook, creating layers of ripples. The dark golden spear and the giant palms collapsed at the same time. The two turned into rolling golden flames that spread out in the void. Ji Tianqing used his most powerful trump card, and finally defeated one of the giant palms. However, the other giant golden palms had already reached him and was about to kill him. He no longer had the corresponding trump card to block the giant palms. At the moment of life and death, Ji Tianqing was surprisingly calm, and his expression was still calm. The path of Dharma is the most holy, the void is the most hidden, the light sees the nature, the darkness sees the truth. He chanted a strange spell in his heart, and his hands formed a mysterious seal in front of his chest. Swoosh! His body immediately turned transparent, as if he had merged with the dark void and disappeared. Not only could he not be seen with the naked eye, but his divine consciousness could not sense his aura. Even if he searched hundreds of miles, he could not find him. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. This was not an invisibility technique, nor was it a camouflage technique. It was a secret technique of the Paragon sword body called void invisibility. Ji Tianqing created it himself. Swoosh! The giant golden palms fell from the sky, crossing the dark void, passing through where Ji Tianqing had been and slapping downward. The void within hundreds of miles was squeezed open by the terrifying power of the giant palms, creating cracks and ripples. However, Tianju's doppelganger's attack missed. The giant golden palms flew thousands of miles in the void, and finally turned into specks of golden light and dissipated. Tianju's doppelganger was stunned, and he frowned, confusion flashing through his eyes. How could he have dodged my attack? No. The secret technique he used must have something to do with the power of space. He must have manipulated the power of space to break open the void and escape into an alternate space, so that he could hide temporarily. Martial God Tianju was someone like him, so how could he not figure out the secret? In the blink of an eye, he guessed the reason for Ji Tianqing's disappearance, and his eyes immediately emitted a cold light. He raised his palms again and slashed at the void like blades. Space-shattering blade. A dense white light burst out from his palms, forming into 2 blades that were over 1,000 feet long. The blades slashed viciously at the space where Ji Tianqing was standing. With a loud boom, 2 huge cracks appeared in the dark void within a radius of 200 miles. Hundreds and thousands of strands of white light could be vaguely seen interweaving within the wide black crack. Martial God Tianju was very clear that the seemingly mysterious white light threads were actually the edges of the folded space. A folded alternate dimension was very complicated and dangerous. Once a martial saint expert fell into it, they would either be sliced into pieces by the edges of the space or be lost within, forever unable to leave. Even a martial god realm expert would not dare to enter the place recklessly. Otherwise they would still lose their lives. Only Ji Tianqing, with his special identity and the memories and knowledge of an unparalleled divine king, dared to use the folded space to hide. Tianju's clone's gaze passed through the 2 cracks in the void and searched for Ji Tianqing's traces in the folded space. 10 breaths later, the 2 cracks closed automatically, but he did not find Ji Tianqing. Therefore, he used the space-shattering blade again and slashed at the void with his palms. Crack! Another loud explosion was heard, and the void was split into pieces again. Thousands of strands of white light threads appeared, interweaving and folding in the darkness. Tianju's clone's gaze was like lightning as he searched for Ji Tianqing's aura with his mind sense. Suddenly, his mind sense detected a faint aura of Dharma power fluctuating in a ball of white light in the depths of the darkness. The aura fluctuated unsteadily, somewhat unstable and disorderly. Apparently, it had suffered serious injuries. Humph! You are indeed hiding here. Tianju's clone sneered as he raised his fists and punched at the cracks in the void. 2 streaks of golden fist radiance condensed from divine power, carrying the power to destroy everything, passed through the cracks in the void and blasted at the ball of white light in the depths of the darkness. Bang! Bang! The next moment, the 2 streaks of fist radiance hit the ball of white light, causing 2 earth-shattering explosions. Although the sound was weakened several times by the void, it was still deafening. The ball of white light was shattered into pieces and spread out in all directions. Ji Tianqing, who was hiding in it, also suffered a devastating blow. Immediately, he was cut by the disorderly power of space and blood splattered all over his body. Fortunately, he had cultivated the sword body of Paragon, so he was able to resist part of the power. He was only cut and bruised all over and covered in blood. Otherwise, he would have been cut into pieces by the power of space and his corpse would have fallen into the disorderly space. Since Martial God Tianju had seen through his plan, he could no longer hide in the alternate space. He had to endure the excruciating pain, explode with the last of his Dharma power, and desperately escape from the alternate space. Swoosh! The next moment, in the void thousands of miles away from Tianju's clone, a streak of white light suddenly lit up. In the white light, Ji Tianqing, who was covered in blood and disheveled hair, staggered out. His injuries were extremely miserable, and his strength had been reduced by more than half. He was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He only turned his head and glanced at Tianju's clone, then turned and fled into the 5 elements world. The sword of burial of heaven turned into a 3-foot-long giant sword, shining with a sacred white light. He stood on the blade and used the sword controlling technique, streaking across the void at the fastest speed, like a meteor. Thousands of miles away, Tianju's clone saw the white light flying and immediately grinned hideously. Ha ha ha! The high and mighty Qinshin actually has such a day of embarrassment and humiliation. However, your embarrassment and humiliation are about to end. Since I've already made my move, how can I let you escape alive? While sneering, his whole body lit up with golden light, and he stepped across the void and chased after Ji Tianqing. He used the teleportation secret technique, seemingly taking a leisurely stroll, but in fact every step he took was 300 miles away. After just a few breaths, he caught up with Ji Tianqing, and the distance between them was only 200 miles. The next step, he could block in front of Ji Tianqing, use the ultimate killing move, and kill Ji Tianqing on the spot. But something that Tianju's clone did not expect happened. At this moment, in the void in front of him, a circle of ripples swayed, and a dazzling icy blue light lit up. When the icy blue light appeared, a cold and dignified woman's voice also came at the same time. Tianju, without my consent, you dare to touch the people of my kingdom of God. Do you want to be my enemy? With this cold shout, a graceful and elegant figure flew out from the icy blue light. This was a young woman in her 20s. She was tall and slender, wearing an exquisite and luxurious ice blue dress. She had a beautiful face, eyebrows like distant mountains, eyes like autumn water, and a cold and elegant temperament, like an otherworldly goddess from the 9 heavens. Chapter 2207. Tianju's doppelganger immediately stopped when he saw the blue-dressed woman. He furrowed his brows and stared coldly at the woman in the blue dress. His eyes were filled with shock. Luo Shui. You're here to stop me? And you're here with your real body. Without a doubt, the blue-dressed woman was Luo Shui, martial god. Moreover, she wasn't like Tianju, who only sent a doppelganger here. She was here with her real body. Luo Shui, martial god, stood proudly in the void and stared coldly at Tianju's doppelganger. She said in a deep voice, "So what? You..." Tianju's doppelganger had mixed feelings. He was shocked and angry. He asked coldly, "Weren't you in seclusion in the divine kingdom? When did you come out?" Haha. Luo Shui, martial god, sneered and asked back, "Do I have to report to you when I come out?" Tianju's doppelganger frowned and his eyes became gloomy. He thought to himself, "Damn bastard. I spent so many years of effort to send you to Luo Shui Divine Kingdom. I didn't expect that I couldn't even find out something as important as Luo Shui coming out of seclusion. You're going to ruin my plan today." Thinking of this, he gnashed his teeth in hatred and clenched his fists so tightly that they creaked. Luo Shui, martial god, asked in a dignified tone, "Tianju, it seems that you've forgotten the agreement between the three divine kingdoms. How dare you attack my heavenly imperial guardian? You're the sinner who started the war between the divine kingdoms by trampling on the agreement. Today, if you don't give me an explanation, I'll destroy your doppelganger. I'll take over the 6 eastern regions of Tianju's divine kingdom." Tianju's doppelganger's expression froze. He sneered. "Heavenly Imperial Guardian? What a joke. Everyone knows Ji Tianqing's real identity. Don't play dumb with me. He's Kenshin's reincarnation. Don't you know that? If not, why would you protect him like this and give him the title of Heavenly Imperial Guardian?" Luo Shui, martial god, sneered and said indifferently, "I don't know what you're talking about. Ji Tianqing was only a young martial saint in his 20s. He is the #1 god disciple of my Luoshan mountain, as well as the #1 general of my Luoshan divine nation. He has made world-shaking contributions and is my most valued right-hand man. You are the master of the heaven-end divine nation, but you actually killed a junior. Such a method is truly despicable and shameless." Tianju's clone immediately looked up to the sky and laughed, saying in a mocking tone, Luo Shui, since you're pretending to be confused, this god won't talk nonsense with you. It's a pity that even though you're devoted and loyal to Kenshin, they treat you like dirt and discard you like a worn-out shoe. Not to mention spending time with you, even when he ascended to the upper realm, he wasn't willing to bring you along. Now that he has been reborn, you still love him so much that you didn't hesitate to enter the void to protect him. He was heartless to you, but you gave so much to him. How foolish and laughable. The void was different from the 5 elements world. There was no heaven and earth spiritual chi, not even air. No matter if it was a martial saint or a martial god, entering the void was very dangerous. It would quickly consume one's spiritual power and affect one's martial arts foundation. Even a martial god expert would weaken his strength and realm if he entered the void too many times and for too long. Because of this, martial god Tianju only sent his clone here. Martial god Luo Shui's real body came to the void to weaken his own strength imperceptibly, which was disadvantageous to him. She looked at Tianju's clone expressionlessly. After he finished speaking, she said indifferently, "Kenshin has already fallen. The past is the past and I've already let it go. No matter how you ridicule me, I feel nothing. However, have you thought about the consequences of deliberately provoking me?" Tianju's clone immediately frowned and asked with a guarded face, "What? You really want to attack this god? If you stop now, this god can let Ji Tianqing escape back to the 5 elements world. If you insist on attacking, this god will no longer care about the alliance. When the 2 divine nations have a conflict, the Luo Shui divine nation will only suffer. Luo Shui, you must think carefully." Indeed, the Luo Shui divine nation had just been invaded by the demon race army. After a cruel war, the Luo Shui divine nation's talents and experts had withered. Now that they were recuperating, it was indeed inappropriate to start a war again. However, martial god Luo Shui raised her eyebrows and sneered, "Tianju, you're too conceited. You only sent a divine soul clone, but I'm here with my real body. If I want to destroy your clone, how many moves do you think it will take? You dare?" Tianju's clone was instantly enraged and asked in a deep voice, "Luo Shui, what do you want to do?" What do I want to do? Martial god Luo Shui sneered. Of course, I want to uphold justice and urge your Tianju divine nation to do things impartially. Tianju's clone frowned again and showed a puzzled expression. What do you mean? Martial god Luo Shui said slowly. First, Ji Tianxing is the heavenly imperial guardian of my Luo Shui divine nation. You and anyone from Tianju divine nation are not allowed to attack him. Second, Ji Tianxing is participating in the divine martial sacred assembly, so he should take first place and receive the rewards he deserves. Third, let your son Yuan Zhan announce the results of the ranking in public, restore Ji Tianxing's reputation, and apologize to Ji Tianxing in public. Tianju's clone sneered after hearing these three conditions. Humph! Luo Shui, I think you're crazy. You dare to negotiate with me? First, second, and third. What a joke. Martial god Luo Shui was not angry and said coldly, is it? Okay, then I'll take you down first, then I'll negotiate with you. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her hands and waved her sleeves, shooting out an overwhelming icy blue brilliance. Whoosh! The icy blue brilliance turned into a dozen icy blue light pillars that swept toward Tianju's clone. Tianju's clone's expression changed, and he immediately waved his palms, shooting out dozens of golden palm shadows. Bang! 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 The golden palms collided with the icy blue light pillars, creating a series of loud bangs and shattering at the same time. Tianju's clone was sent flying, his body trembling with golden light. Martial god Luo Shui turned into a blue light and chased after him, waving his palms again. Boom! 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 The two sides fought in the void, creating earth-shattering noises and dazzling brilliance. Soon 30 breaths time passed. Martial god Luo Shui and Tianju's clone exchanged more than 1,000 moves, and the winner was finally decided. The result was obvious. Tianju's clone was beaten black and blue, missing an arm and a leg. His body was full of cracks and his golden light dimmed. Martial god Luo Shui used a huge ice phoenix claw to capture him, making him unable to move or escape. Martial god Luo Shui said expressionlessly, Tianju, you only have two choices now. Either you agree to my conditions or I'll destroy your clone. You spent a wisp of your divine soul and 300 years of hard work to refine this divine soul avatar. Chapter 2208. Martial god Luo Shui's tone was calm and indifferent. She did not pretend to be fierce or angry, but it was precisely because of this that martial god Tianju knew very well that she would definitely do as she said. Were those three conditions more important, or was the avatar more important? Tianju's clone fell into silence, hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. Indeed, martial god Luo Shui's request was excessive. Not only did she want Yuan Zhan to apologize to Ji Tianxing, but she also wanted to restore Ji Tianxing's reputation and give him the reward of first place in the sacred assembly. Although martial god Tianju did not care about the resources and pearls rewarded for first place in the sacred assembly. However, he had originally planned to give the pearl to Yuan Chong in disguise. But now Yuan Chong was dead, and Yuan Zhan's plan had failed. Martial god Tianju had suffered a double loss, and he was so angry that he almost vomited blood. His main body was cultivating in seclusion, and only his avatar had entered the void to kill Ji Tianxing. However, martial god Luo Shui's main body had arrived and easily captured him. If he did not agree to martial god Luo Shui's conditions, this avatar would be destroyed. At that time, not only would his soul be affected, but he would also be unable to control his divine kingdom for a short period of time. After his seclusion ended, he would have to spend another 300 years to refine another avatar. It was time-consuming and exhausting. When he thought of this, martial god Tianju was in a dilemma, unable to make a choice. Martial god Luo Shui also saw his struggle and said coldly, "You only have 2 hours to consider. I'll take you back to Skygaze City first. I think that when you reach the void platform you will know what to choose." With that, she carried Tianju's avatar and flew through the void, flying toward the five elements realm at a speed faster than the speed of light. Tianju's avatar's eyes immediately widened in anger and worry. He was the noble ruler of the Tianju divine kingdom, Yet he had been captured by martial god Luo Shui and escorted back to Skygaze City? Even if he was only an avatar, when he appeared in front of everyone, it would definitely cause a huge uproar and make him a huge laughingstock. Once he appeared, this earth-shattering news would spread throughout the entire Shenwu continent. Even if one used their toes to think, they would know that he would become the object of ridicule and discussion among martial artists for countless years to come. The more Tianju's clone thought about it, the more upset he became. Finally, he could not hold back his anger and shouted angrily, "Luo Shui, you are really ruthless. But have you ever thought about the consequences of humiliating me like this?" Haha, what consequences can there be? The Luo Shui martial god sneered as he sped through the void. It's nothing more than you taking revenge on the Luo Shui divine kingdom in your rage. However, your main body is still in seclusion, and I don't know how many years it will take before you come out. At that time, the Luo Shui divine nation might not be afraid of you. Right now, you only have one divine soul avatar, which you use to control the divine kingdom. However, I came out of seclusion in advance and acted with my true body. If I don't take advantage of you now, when will I? You! Tianju's clone was so angry that his whole body trembled, and his eyes were almost spitting fire. However, Luo Shui martial god was right. He had indeed lost. He lost because he couldn't come out of seclusion earlier than Luo Shui martial god. After a moment of silence, Tianju's clone suppressed his anger and said in a low voice, "Luo Shui, you win. This time I admit defeat and agree to your conditions." That's good. Luo Shui martial god nodded and said expressionlessly, "It's useless to just agree. I have to take you to Sky Gazing City and personally supervise you to fulfill my conditions. Don't worry, as long as you don't go back on your words, I won't throw you in front of everyone and make you lose face." Tianju's clone didn't answer, but snorted coldly, full of anger. However, he was indeed relieved and thought to himself, "Luo Shui, this god will remember today's humiliation. When this god achieves great success and comes out of seclusion, I will take revenge tenfold. At that time, not only will I trample you under my feet, but I will also destroy the Luo Shui divine kingdom. As for Jitianxing, even if this god's main body doesn't come out of seclusion, I can still kill him. I won't let him live until then." Tianju's clone didn't speak anymore and remained silent. Luo Shui martial god also didn't say a word and hurried on with Tianju's clone. But in fact, there was a trace of coldness hidden in her clear and calm eyes, as if she had already made up her mind. Swoosh! Dazzling starlight streaked across the void like a meteor. In the silver light, it was Ji Tianxing, whose white robe was stained with blood and his hair was disheveled. After escaping from Tianju's clone, he flew continuously for an entire day without stopping for a moment. At this time, he was already very far away from the previous area and very close to the Five Elements world. Hundreds of thousands of miles ahead of them was a gigantic star shining with golden light. He turned his head and looked at the void behind him. Seeing that no one was chasing him, he gradually slowed down and relaxed his mind. Phew! Fortunately, martial god Tianju's clone didn't chase after me. He let out a long breath and hurriedly activated the power of the heaven-mending pearl, releasing a dense white light to cover his body and quickly heal his injuries. At the same time, the voice of the burial of heaven also sounded in his mind. The person who appeared out of thin air and blocked Tianju's clone seemed to be a woman? Ji Tianxing's body stiffened. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "Yes, it's her." The burial of heaven said with a complicated tone, "I thought you didn't see her. So you already knew. Since she made a move, martial god Tianju's clone definitely can't escape. You're already out of danger." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, "How can you be so sure?" Of course. The burial of heaven said with certainty, her clone was destroyed by the ancestor demon god long ago. Since she appeared now, it must be her true body. She will definitely win against Tianju's clone with her true body. Ji Tianxing said calmly, but everyone knows that if the true body enters the void, it will affect the foundation of the divine Tao and quickly weaken one's strength. The burial of heaven said with some anger, "Nonsense, she knows this better than anyone. But if she wants to save you, she will not care about the consequences and the price. Don't you know? It's fine if you pretended to be deaf and mute in your previous life. But in this life, do you still want to let her down? Not to mention her. Even my sword can't stand it anymore. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said calmly, the past is the past. In this life I am only Ji Tianqing, not some Kenshin. I just want to accompany my wife and child. I don't want to owe anyone anything. The Burial of Heaven sneered and asked, if that's really the case, then why did you stay in the Luoshui Divine Kingdom? Why did you fight for the Luoshui Divine Kingdom and repel the demon army? Do you dare say that you didn't do all this to make up for your regrets and repay her kindness? Ji Tianqing remained silent and closed his eyes to circulate his energy. Chapter 2209. After an unknown period of time, Burial of Heaven carried Ji Tianqing and flew to the vicinity of the Five Elements world. 10,000 miles ahead was the golden light shield that enveloped the world. Burial of Heaven stopped and transmitted his voice to Ji Tianqing. The God Seal is in front of us. If we want to return to the Five Elements world, I'm afraid it'll be a little troublesome. Ji Tianqing was closing his eyes to heal his injuries. Hearing Burial of Heaven's transmission, he opened his eyes and observed the golden light shield in front of him. He nodded and said with a solemn expression, this golden light shield is the God Seal. With our current strength, it's impossible to break it. Only by finding the gap in the light shield can we return to the Five Elements world. Gap? Burial of Heaven thought for a moment and asked, like the gap we saw before, the one caused by the Phantom Star Core? And the one in the North Underworld Mountain, under the Ghost Desert, the one caused by the wreckage of the Divine Warship? Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, that's right. But don't worry, I still have a way to return to the Five Elements world quickly. What way? Burial of Heaven asked. Ji Tianqing smiled and said in a mysterious tone, Jotianten Absolute's Tower. When he left Jotianten Absolute's Tower, he had refined a small golden tower on the 5th floor of the tower, and stored it in his sea of consciousness. He only needed to use his divine thought to communicate with the small golden tower, and he could return to Jotianten Absolute's tower instantly. Burial of Heaven was relieved and said in a gratified tone, that's a good idea. You can return to Jotianten Absolute's tower with a thought. I just don't know if the small tower can still sense the Jotianten Absolute's tower when you're in the void now? Ji Tianqing said with certainty, that Jotianten Absolute's tower is a king-grade artifact that can isolate the heavenly axiom. Even if I'm in the void, it shouldn't be a problem. Burial of Heaven hurriedly urged. Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and summon the small tower. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said with a smile, don't worry. Look at the void in front of us. Doesn't this golden light shield look a little familiar? What do you mean? Burial of Heaven was a little confused, not understanding what he was trying to do. Ji Tianqing's smile became more and more playful. His tone was somewhat self-deprecating as he said, I don't know if our luck is too good, or if we flew in the wrong direction when we were escaping. This void and this seal are a little familiar. It's not far from the ethereal star core. There's such a thing? Burial of Heaven was shocked. Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. Of course. Maybe the heavens are really looking after me? Or is it because the Five Elements world is rotating too fast and has sent the ethereal star nucleus to me? Burial of Heaven quickly asked, no. I mean, there's nothing special about this area. It's no different from the other voids. How can you remember it? Ji Tianqing nodded again and said proudly, have you forgotten? Eidetic memory is my innate ability. If I remember correctly, we can see the ethereal star nucleus after we fly 1,000,000 miles to the right. Burial of Heaven said doubtfully, if that's the case, let's go and take the ethereal star nucleus first. Anyway, you've broken through to the martial sage realm. This time we can take the ethereal star nucleus so that we don't have to make a special trip in the future. Ji Tianqing did not waste any time. He quickly drove Burial of Heaven and flew to the void on the right. About 6 hours later, Burial of Heaven had flown more than 800,000 miles. At this time, Ji Tianqing saw a diamond-shaped meteorite embedded in the golden light shield in front of him. Ji Tianqing was far away. At this time it seemed that the dark diamond-shaped meteorite was only the size of a boat. However, he knew very well that the illusory spirit star nucleus was at least 10,000 miles long. Fortunately, after 2 to 3 years, the ethereal star nucleus is still here and has not been taken away by others. He murmured with a relieved face and heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Buried Heaven continued. Apart from you and the martial god powerhouses, it's impossible for ordinary martial saints to take away this star core. Ji Tianxing nodded and said in a relaxed tone, no matter what, as long as the ethereal star nucleus is still here, it's fine. Let's go and take it now. When we return to the 5 elements world, I'll try to smelt it and improve your grade. Burial of Heaven was also full of anticipation and said excitedly, if I smelt the entire star nucleus of the big world, I can at least advance to the empty god level. The empty god level referred to the martial gods. In the 5 elements world, the empty god level magic treasure was the top divine weapon. Ji Tianxing did not say anything more. He drove Burial of Heaven through the void and flew toward the ethereal star nucleus. After a short 2 hours, he arrived near the ethereal star nucleus. Observing closely, he found that the ethereal star nucleus had not changed at all. The 10,000-mile-long diamond-shaped crystal nucleus was still inserted in the 5 elements world and pierced through the golden light barrier. On the other side of the star nucleus, there was a 20,000-mile-long star halo, like an ancient starry path. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing landed on the star nucleus and walked along the dark rocky ground toward the canyon in the middle of the star nucleus. When I entered the canyon, I found the ethereal sacred land at the end of the canyon. It was there that I found the ancient god's Mi star ring, which contained 18 martial sage souls and 1 martial god soul. This time I want to refine the ethereal star nucleus, and I guess I have to go to the sacred land. It's the center of the entire star nucleus, and it's the best place to set up a formation. As he spoke, he passed through the canyon and flew toward the ethereal sacred land in the depths of the canyon. After a short quarter of an hour, he arrived at the end of the canyon. 200 miles in front of him was a wide and tall cave entrance. He had fought with the mutant blood god in this place. The ground was still full of cracks left by the sword Qi, and there were many piles of broken stones. However, when he raised his head to look at the dark cave entrance, his body stiffened, and he was stunned on the spot. He saw 4 golden figures standing on both sides of the wide cave entrance. The 4 figures were all dressed like guards, but they looked a little strange. They were all more than 10 feet tall and had big heads. Their upper bodies were human, but their lower bodies were like lions. They had 4 thick hooves and dark golden manes. Their bodies were as sturdy as millstones, and they had 4 thick arms. On their broad chests, there was a basin-sized dark red scale. The scale was like a tortoise shell with lines and lattices. There were also circles of lines in the center. Ji Tianxing observed with great detail, and discovered that the patterns on the chests of the 4 outsiders were all dark golden in color, and there were only 3 circles on each of them. Strange. Why are there alien warriors on the ethereal star nucleus? The 4 aliens look so strange. How come I've never seen them before? At the same time, the 4 alien guards also found him. Chapter 22:10. Roar! Roar! With a deep roar that sounded like a lion's roar, the 4 alien guards broke through the void and rushed in front of Ji Tianxing. Swish! 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 Dark red light flashed as the 4 of them spread out and surrounded Ji Tianxing. Their hooves stepped on the pitch-black rocky ground, moving slowly and circling Ji Tianxing. The halberds and long sabers in their hands were all pointed at Ji Tianxing, surrounded by dark red murderous aura. An invisible murderous aura suppressed Ji Tianxing like a huge mountain, making his blood flow sluggish and his magic power a little sluggish. Ji Tianxing frowned as he sized up the 4 non-humankind guards with a cautious look on his face. He muttered in his heart, "The power they have is a little strange. It is not the power of the 5 elements, nor is it the magic power cultivated by absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. I have been to so many star areas and seen so many races, but I have never seen people of this race. Maybe they are from a star area even further away? Or a new race?" The burial of heaven reminded him through soul transmission, since they appeared on the core of the illusory spirit star. Have you never suspected that they might be from the illusory spirit race? Ji Tianqing shook his head and said, no. When I entered the holy land of the illusory spirit race, I saw the writings and murals of the illusory spirit race. The illusory spirit race is good at mind and soul power. Their brains are different from ordinary people, but their appearance is definitely not like this. The burial of heaven said non-committally, you will know whether they are or not when you try. Therefore, Ji Tianqing searched his memory and tried to use the language of the illusory spirit race to ask the 4 alien guards, who are you? Why are you here? Although his pronunciation was not standard and sounded a little bad, the language of the illusory spirit race was correct. However, the illusory spirit race's language he spoke was basically correct. If the other party was from the illusory spirit race, they would definitely be able to understand him. However, something unexpected happened to Ji Tianqing. When the 4 alien guards heard him, their expressions changed. Their eyes shone fiercely, and dark red flames of murderous aura burst out of their bodies. Roar! Roar! All 4 of them let out a muffled roar simultaneously, wielding their long blades and halberds while releasing tens of dark red blood-red light beams, launching a besieging attack towards Ji Tianqing. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and transmitted his voice to Burial of Heaven. What kind of rotten idea are you giving me? At first glance, it was obvious that they had a grudge against the illusory spirit clan. As soon as he heard me speak the language of the illusory spirit race, he wanted to kill me immediately. Burial of Heaven comforted him indifferently. It's just a few low-level guards. You can easily deal with them. Ji Tianqing hurriedly brandished the Burial of Heaven sword, slashing out sword lights that filled the sky as he fought with the 4 foreign race guards. At the same time, he sent a voice transmission to the Burial of Heaven. How many low-level guards? Are you kidding me? Which world's low-level guards would have the power of a martial sage? Unless they did not come from a low-level world, but from the upper world. Burial of Heaven was also stunned for a moment and said doubtfully, but they don't look like people from the upper world. We have never seen this race in the upper world. Ji Tianqing defended against the attacks of the 4 foreign race guards as he said, anyway, this matter is very strange. Let me deal with them first, then I will slowly think about it. The attacking moves of the 4 foreign race guards were a little strange. They were not like the martial artists of the 5 elements world who paid attention to the beginning, the end, the transition and the form. The attacking moves of the 4 guards were all well-practiced killing moves, like the simplest and most brutal killing moves. Moreover, the power that they used was also dark red like blood, completely condensed from killing intent and a special aura. Every single move he executed was executed in a grand manner with surging killing intent, and it was domineering and ferocious to the extreme. Although the strength of the 4 guards was only equivalent to a rank 5 or 6 martial sage. However, it was Ji Tianqing's first time fighting with the martial artists of this race. He was not familiar with the attributes and martial skills of the other party, so he was more cautious. After a full 10 breaths, he had exchanged more than 20 moves with the 4 guards before he had a rough idea of the other party's moves. Thus, he no longer hit his strength and used his unique sword skill. Breaking Sun Sword. Burial of Heaven waved his sword and slashed out more than 10 dark gold sword radiances, in an extremely violent manner, slashing towards the 4 guards. The 4 guards hurriedly waved their long sabers and halberds, letting out angry roars and releasing dark red killing intent. Instantly, the 4 of them were enveloped by the dark red killing intent, as if they were wearing a layer of dark red armor. Bang bang bang. The huge golden sword slashed the 4 guards, causing a series of dull sounds to be heard. The killing intent armor of the 4 guards was slashed into pieces, and they flew out in a sorry state, falling into a pile of rocks. Just as they got up, they rushed towards Ji Tianqing even more furiously. At this moment, Ji Tianqing waved his sword, clapped his palms, and used his unique secret skill. Heavenly Dragon Palm. Heaven-breaking sword. His left hand slapped out a mountain-sized golden dragon claw, slapping 2 guards away on the spot, smashing them into the ground hundreds of miles away. His right hand waved his sword and slashed out a huge sword that could split heaven and earth, splitting one of the guards into two halves on the spot, causing dark red blood to splatter everywhere. As for the last non-human guard, he had just rushed in front of him, holding his halberd and thrusting it fiercely. He clenched his left hand into a fist and punched the guard's head, using the star-breaking fist. Bang! With a dull sound, the star-breaking fist hit the guard, blasting his head into pieces, splattering blood and brain matter all over the ground. What surprised Ji Tianqing was that the non-human guard whose head was blasted into pieces did not die on the spot. Moreover, this person's divine soul did not escape from his body. The headless body got up again and rushed over without caring about its own safety, waving his halberd and thrusting out dozens of blood-red light. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing could not help but frown and exclaim in a low voice, "Oh my God! Is this possible? His vitality is too tenacious, and his willpower is too strong, isn't it?" While he was shocked, he waved the burial of heaven sword and stabbed out a cold light, aiming directly at the chest of the headless guard. The cold light flashed, and in the next moment, it pierced the scales on the chest of the headless guard, exploding with a loud bang. Bang! With a dull sound, the dark red scales on the chest of the headless guard shattered, and his entire body was blown into pieces, scattering in the valley. This time his body was really smashed into pieces and he did not get up again. Ji Tianqing suddenly understood and said to himself, "I see. It seems that the weakness of these non-humans is the scales on their chests." The burial of heaven thought for a moment and added, "Maybe that can't be called a weakness, but the source of their strength closely related to their lives." At this moment, a deep roar came from a spacious cave not far away. Ji Tianqing turned his head and saw more than a dozen non-human guards in black armor running out as fast as lightning. Many of the guards were holding long sabers and halberds, and they were surrounding a non-human man in silver armor with scarlet eyes. Chapter 22:11. When the silver-armored man appeared with a dozen or so guards, he was shocked. Ji Tianqing realized that the situation was not good and vaguely felt heavy pressure. The two alien guards he had slapped away earlier were covered in blood and in a sorry state. Seeing the silver-armored man come out, the two of them ignored their injuries and hurriedly retreated to the sides and knelt down. The two of them lowered their heads respectfully and mumbled a lot of strange syllables. Ji Tianqing listened for a while, but couldn't understand a single word. However, he could roughly guess that the two injured guards were most likely reporting what had happened. Sure enough, after the silver-armored man heard them, he turned his head and glanced at Ji Tianqing. Two dark red flames rose in his scarlet eyes, flickering and dancing. He put his left hand behind his back, and his right hand held the hilt of the sword hanging at his waist, walking towards Ji Tianqing. The dozen or so black-armored guards around him also gripped their long sabers and halberds, pointing at Ji Tianqing. Everyone's eyes were cold, and their bodies exuded a terrifying murderous aura. Ji Tianqing looked at the crowd with an indifferent expression, and secretly communicated with buried heaven through God's soul voice transmission. At present, it seems that this group of aliens may have a grudge against the illusory spirit race. They came to the illusory spirit star core, and have already occupied the illusory spirit race's holy land. I don't know how many people are hiding in the holy land. If we want to take the star core, we have to deal with this group of people first. Burial of Heaven reminded him, they have a lot of people, and the strength of their leader is unfathomable. We shouldn't act too hastily. If you have a chance, you can capture an alien alive, and use the soul-searching secret technique to interrogate him. Maybe you can get the answer. Even if you can't communicate with words, you can at least read their soul memories, right? Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. This method is feasible. I'll try my best. At this moment, 16 black-armored guards surrounded him. The man in silver armor also stopped 100 steps away from him. He looked at him with burning eyes and opened his mouth to speak. What's your relationship with the illusory spirit race? The silver-armored man was speaking the language of the illusory spirit clan. However, his accent sounded even worse than Ji Tianqing's. It was even weirder. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing vaguely understood. He replied slowly in the language of the illusory spirit race, I have nothing to do with the illusory spirit race. The 10 or so non-humankind guards didn't change their expressions at all. They didn't react to his words at all, and still looked ferocious. Only the silver-armored man understood his words. The flames in his eyes flickered a few times, as if he was considering whether his words were true or false. After a moment of silence he asked again, "Are you from this planet?" After saying that, he pointed at the 5 elements world behind him that was shrouded in golden light. Ji Tianqing nodded. The flames in the silver-armored man's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and a smile appeared on his broad and firm face. Good, very good. He seemed to be in a good mood. He clapped his hands and said in the broken language of the illusory spirit race, "You take me in and I will spare your life." Ji Tianqing sneered and replied coldly, "Ridiculous. What right do you have to spare my life? Also, who are you? Where are you from? Why are you on this star core? Why do you want to enter our world?" It was probably because he had said too much and asked too many questions at once. The silver-armored man didn't understand all his questions. He only understood that his attitude was to refuse. Suddenly, the flames in the silver-armored man's eyes flickered, and a ferocious sneer appeared on his face. His whole body emitted a blazing killing intent. "You have no choice. It's your honor to lead the way for heaven conquering." After saying these 2 sentences in the language of the illusory spirit race, the silver-armored man waved his hand and gave an order. Suddenly, the 10 or so non-humankind guards roared and pounced on Ji Tianqing with murderous intent. Roar! Roar, roar, roar! In an instant, the long saber and halberd danced in the air, and dark red blood radiance filled the area. It turned into various saber radiance, sword shadows, spear radiance and sharp blades, and engulfed Ji Tianqing. A terrifying murderous aura sealed off an area of a few hundred miles, fiercely suppressing Ji Tianqing. The meridians and bones in his body started to twist, and his blood seemed to be boiling. It was about to break free from his blood vessels and meridians and explode. They can affect the blood chi and mind of others with their invisible aura? This race is really not simple. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself. He quickly swung the Burial of Heaven sword and launched a counterattack. Big Dipper sword. Sky-capturing claw. In the face of more than 10 martial sage realm non-humankind guards, he didn't dare to be careless. He used all his strength to launch a deadly attack. In order to increase his combat strength, he even used the celestial dragon body and turned into a 100 feet tall golden armored giant. As a result, the pressure on him was greatly reduced. His body flickered as he shuttled back and forth between the canyon and the empty space, smoothly avoiding the attacks of the guards. Occasionally, there were some dark red blood radiance that slashed his body, but it only caused minor injuries. His life was not in danger. Bang, bang, bang. Boom, 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 boom. Ji Tianqing and the dozen or so outsider guards exchanged more than 100 moves. The heavens and the earth cracked, and dazzling light filled the sky. Deafening explosions resounded through the entire canyon. The incomparably violent impact shook the huge illusory spirit star nucleus. Various dark red blood radiance and silver starlight fragments burst out like raindrops and scattered in the empty space. While the 2 sides were fighting, the man in silver armor stood in the same spot and watched expressionlessly. He didn't have any intention to intervene. After about 100 breaths, Ji Tianqing and the non-humankind guards exchanged more than 100 blows. Ji Tianqing's body was covered with wounds, and pale golden blood flowed out. He had suffered some minor injuries. On the other hand, the non-humankind guards were all covered in blood and wounds. Many of them had their hands and feet cut off. They were seriously injured. At this moment, the man in silver armor waved his hand and shouted in a deep voice. Immediately, the non-humankind guards retreated, put away their weapons and stopped attacking. The man in silver armor looked at Ji Tianqing with his burning eyes. He clapped his hands and praised, "Very good. Even in my clan, brave and skilled warriors like you are rare. I admire you. I'll give you one last chance. Work for me, be my servant, help me expand my territory, and I'll give you glory." He was still speaking in the language of the illusory spirit race, but he spoke very slowly and with an awkward accent. This was also the longest sentence he had ever spoken. Ji Tianqing sneered and shook his head. I only work for myself. You and your race are far from qualified. The man in silver armor was not surprised at all. He sneered and said, You are very good and proud. But unfortunately I will kill you. Remember, you will die under the blade of An Yu, the bravest captain of the Third Fleet. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.